Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1355 of the War News stream. And it is once again another Sunday night fundraiser stream to raise more money for those in Ukraine. And also, we have very big news tonight. We have seen Ukraine launch a massive attack on Crimea and also mainland Russia at the exact same time. We've also seen that Belgium is reporting foreign drones over their nuke sites and airports yet again. And also, the Iran-Israel situation seems to be imminent once again, as analysts are warning of it about to be popping off once again. So it's good to see you all on the stream.
And of course, we're going to be making sure to cover the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we have heard major and significant developments around the entirety of the globe, and most importantly, from inside of Ukraine and Eastern Europe, as we have been able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces have landed another significant hit on the Russian Federation's armed forces overnight, striking the port of Tuapse, electrical substations throughout most areas of the border regions near to Ukraine, and also railway infrastructure and fuel storage sites inside of Crimea. A major blow was dealt to the Russian armed forces overnight, to say the least, and not only that, to the Russian Federation at large. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces have also seen that the Russian Federation's armed forces have slowed their offensive efforts and have largely stalled as of today inside of Pokrovsk, as Russian Federation armed forces are now at great jeopardy and risk of counterattack and are currently attempting to reconsolidate their front lines, lest they may end up being counterattacked and wiped out before they can even consolidate their holdings within the city of Pokrovsk at this point. Outside of that, we have also been able to hear that Russian drones have been spotted over Belgium again, including the Liège airport, as well as a nuclear facility within northern Belgium, once again leading to a significant security situation, and one that has been ongoing for multiple days on end at this point without an end in sight. We have now heard that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is offering to provide actual physical support to the Kingdom of Belgium to assist them with the ongoing troubles that they're generally having with the drones that are currently permeating the skies over Belgium on a daily basis. Meanwhile, we are now hearing that Israel and Iran largely appear to be preparing to go to war, as military analysts have started to put the idea forward that the major military buildups that we're currently seeing inside of Western Iran, as well as the military planning that's being conducted inside of Israel, is largely indicating that both sides are clearly looking towards starting the conflict once more. We have also heard that multiple officials and intelligence reports have started to emerge with the story that the nuclear facilities were not as heavily damaged from the Operation Midnight Hammer attacks and from the Israeli-Iranian 12-day war as originally anticipated, and it appears that Iran's nuclear programs may actually be much more closer to being on track than they were ever anticipated to be from prior reports and statements from multiple government officials. Outside of that, we have also heard that the United States of America has conducted an airstrike today inside of Yemen, killing 2 Al-Qaeda officials that were inside of the country. Outside of that, we have also heard that Venezuela is still working at this moment on trying to prepare for an eventual U.S. attack, as we have seen multiple clips of the training of the ground forces of the Venezuelan army, and we've also been able to see that the Venezuelans are now training cadets on how to use FPV drones against possible landing forces of the United States that may be coming here in the near future. Suffice it to say, we have a decent amount, a significant amount, as a matter of fact, of news to cover from just the past 24 hours alone. And we are going to be making sure to get into each and every single piece of the major news that we have tonight in as much detail as we possibly can. And of course, I have to give a massive shout out to the fundraiser that we are running tonight. It is Sunday night, and of course, by tradition here in the Lee Spring Army, it is the Sunday night fundraiser. And tonight's fundraiser is for none other than Razom For Ukraine, an absolutely amazing nonprofit that has been helping out in Ukraine well before we even started to cover the news of the war in Ukraine itself that started in the 24th of February of 2022, and any support that's given goes directly to Razom For Ukraine and helps out significantly on the front lines for families and citizens of Ukraine that are heavily afflicted by the ongoing war that we are covering tonight. And so with that, folks, it's time for us to get on into that major news from around the entirety of the world, and that's going to be moving us directly on in to the area of Russia, at least at this point right now, starting with our largest stories first, and then working our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the course of the night. We have been able to hear, and we have seen by video and picture evidence, that a significant drone attack was conducted by the Ukrainian armed forces overnight, and these attacks have been, once again, wildly successful, like multiple other days' worth of attacks that have been conducted so far. The Ukrainian armed forces, of course, went for the typical targets that we have seen drones attack throughout this period of the war, including oil loading ports along the Russian coastline, power substations or electrical substations, railways, and fuel storage depots, along with oil refineries. We've been able to see that a large number of electrical substations were directly targeted and hit overnight by the Ukrainian armed forces, including the following: an electrical substation within northern Crimea at the city of Dzhankoy. You can see the faint burning in the distance of the electrical substation on fire, which is a direct hit and once again plunging the city of Dzhankoy into an energy blackout at this point. We also saw that at the major city of Taganrog within the Russian Rostov Oblast, another electrical substation was also hit with the power going out. This is a 110 kilovolt substation, so fairly significant in its power carrying capabilities, and once again, as a result of this, a significant area of the city of Taganrog is now without power. And we have also been able to see inside of the area of Voronezh that it is believed at the moment that the attacks appear to have targeted electrical substations within the area. We were able to hear the air defense fire, and we also have been able to hear at least some eyewitness reports that explosions did hit the electrical substations within the area. And here's the clip. We can hear the air raid sirens in the distance.
That's either some really bad fog or smog out there in the distance, one or the other, or smoke it could be.
Man, knowing Russia, this is top-grade industrial smog, most likely, I would assume. But it does appear that the Russian Federation has suffered a pretty significant amount of damage to their electrical infrastructure, at least near to the Ukrainian border regions and in the occupied territories, overnight alone. These sorts of attacks and damage will most likely result in the Russian Federation seeing larger areas that have been subjected to blackouts, and this would cause a significant amount of strain on the Russian central government's resources and abilities, as they will have to either decide to provide these citizens with the requisite heating materials that would be needed to keep them warm, considering that the winter months have arrived within that area, or they will have to let them freeze, which could result in a significant loss of manpower for the Russian Federation and its war effort, and could also result in significant domestic upheaval within the areas that are afflicted by these power blackouts. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians also targeted other key infrastructure throughout the Russian Federation itself, including a significant rail yard within the Rostov region. We were able to see a clip of the attack on this railway, and it stated that this was the Likhovska railway station in the Rostov region, and I unfortunately was not able to find the Likhovska railway station before we went live on air. I tried to do as much searching as I could, and this came up as being in the Tatarstan Oblast of the Russian Federation and not the Rostov Oblast. So we are generally assuming that at this point, this is along the Russian main line that travels through the Rostov Oblast, which travels through Milorovo, Kamensk, Shatinsky, Shakhty, and then into Rostov-on-Don, and then travels further south out of the Rostov Oblast and towards to the city of Krasnodar. We are generally assuming that the attack happened somewhere along that main line corridor of the railroad within this area. But here's the clip. We hear the drone coming on in, and there's a little hit. Oh, bada boom, baby.
Give him a big little smacking. Oh, multiple smackings.
Oh, I gotta tell you, it's not looking too good. That's not looking good at all. And I've got to tell y'all, these attacks on the railroads are quite interesting, at least with the kind of intention that the Ukrainians have behind these attacks. Railroads are fairly resilient infrastructure systems as far as attacks are concerned. Any sort of damage can be easily repaired, usually within less than a day, unless if it's affecting a larger logistical structure like a bridge of some sort. Beyond that, attacking Russian railway rail beds is something that doesn't really produce a lot of long-term damage and only amalgamates in short-term delays. Still, the Ukrainian armed forces are conducting a large number of attacks onto the Russian railroads and attempting to inflict as much damage as they possibly can on any sort of critical infrastructure. And there are some weak points within railroads that can be targeted and attacked that generally will weaken the logistical infrastructure of the system at large within a regional area. One of the most common attacks that we've seen so far conducted by the Ukrainians and Ukrainian-aligned partisans is on railway signal boxes. Railway signal boxes are incredibly common and are usually found all over the world, but to quickly show y'all a modern railway signal box, and let me see if I can find one for y'all here really quickly. Oh man, here they are. This is generally at least an idea of a railway signal box. These signal boxes, or signal cabinets as they're sometimes called, house a decent amount of electronic components that the railroad uses to be able to operate their signals, which is basically the railway's version of a red light. The damage that can be inflicted on these cabinets is quite easy. All you have to do is be able to break in, open up the door, and then fling in a Molotov cocktail, or directly hit it with an FPV drone. Either way, if any sort of damage is caused to computer systems, all of the signals that were attached to the signal box will automatically revert back to a red indication, which is a stop signal. That means that everything within the area is completely stopped from moving unless if they get direct inputs from a dispatcher or if repairs are effected to the signal cabinet quickly. This can take some time and the damage can be somewhat expensive, at least if it's quite large in scale and the entire signal cabinet burned to the ground. Another weak key point that can be attacked and damaged are the engines themselves. And let me go show y'all some Russian railway locomotives here to give y'all an idea of what we're looking at or what we're generally dealing with. This is a fairly common model of diesel-electric Russian engine that's operated. It's a car body design, which is incredibly difficult to repair and maintain, funnily enough. That's why the United States doesn't use these anymore, but these are incredibly common amongst most of the Russian railway networks. If it's not these, then it's an electric variant that is fed its power from an overhead catenary or a power line generally. These engines can be directly targeted and damaged quite easily by any sort of incendiary device or anything similar, and we have seen the Ukrainian partisans and Ukrainian drones have been attacking these engines and trying to set them on fire, hopefully setting the fuel tanks underslung on the body alight as well, and causing a large amount of damage to the engine where it will be forced into an engine shop for repairs. Generally, these are the weak points, the primary weak points that we've seen so far are that the Ukrainians are attacking. At least in this clip that happened near to this railway station, we actually do not know what they directly targeted. Whatever it was actually a good ways off of the tracks, just to show y'all here in this clip again. This is in a rail yard, and whatever that is over there appears to be a supporting structure near to the rail yard, and not directly within the rail yard itself. So we actually do not know what was targeted at this particular rail yard, but we do understand that this is a larger part of the Ukrainian campaign to start knocking out the Russian railroads and make them operate at a greater reduced efficiency. Russian railroads are far more important to the Russian logistics system than American railroads are to the American logistics system. American railroads transport around 50% to 55% of all cargoes that are transported over land in the United States every single year, with the other remainder, 50 to 45%, being transported by 18-wheelers, usually over medium to short distances. For this reason, American railroads, while being about half of the volume of land transport by tonnage that is done in the United States every year, is not the be-all end-all for land transport here in the United States of America. However, in the Russian Federation, the story is very different. Around 70% of all Russian cargo by tonnage volume alone is transported by the Russian railways, meaning that the lion's share of goods that are transported in Russia are on the Russian railways at some point or another right now. That means that if you cause any damage to the Russian railroads, you're not causing, like you would in America, damage to possibly 50% of the transport infrastructure over land in the country. You're actually causing damage to about 70%, which is a very large margin, and also can have significant economic fallout, along with the ability to have significant military fallout in terms of supplies not being able to make it to the front lines that would have made it there otherwise. For this reason, these attacks have a lot of promise in them, and it does appear that this is starting to become a more and more common line of attacks that the Ukrainian armed forces are now starting to conduct against the Russians to reduce supply efficiency. Still, the Ukrainians have also gone to greater lengths, further than attacking substations and railways, to cause more damage to the Russian logistical infrastructures throughout the southern part of the country. And that brings us right back to the port of Tuapse. Tuapse was just attacked recently and heavily damaged in a Ukrainian naval drone attack, which hit the oil loading pier that is directly outside of the breakwaters of the ports of Tuapse. These breakwaters are generally what would protect most of everything else at the port of Tuapse from a direct Ukrainian attack, as the Ukrainian drones would have to make it through this very narrow passageway to make it into the rest of the port and to be able to attack the general area. Luckily, the Russians, because they're poor, built this giant oil loading platform right outside the protected area of the port, and so for that reason, this is wildly easy to attack, and it appears the Ukrainian naval drones attacked this for a second time last night. We actually have two individual clips of this, and here's the clips. Here's at least the first one. There it is.
Oh, wow. This guy sounds like Gollum or something in the background, too.
My precious. Man, like, man.
My precious just got exploded out there in the distance. Damn.
Oh, and it's even better. There's a second clip, Mr. President. We have a second clip. There's the explosion and the fire. Gary.
Oh my God! Brittany Taz just threw in a $1,000 donation right there. Do you see that? Look at that. We're at 2,070 raised right there. That is a huge donation. A huge shout out to Brittany for that. That's very generous.
Holy moly! Brittany Taz just threw in a $1,000 donation, making up half of the volume of the fundraiser alone in a single donation.
Let's go!
Unbelievable. A humongous shout out to Brittany Taz for supporting the fundraiser with a $1,000 donation. And hopefully we'll be able to see that we hit the fundraiser goal incredibly soon. This fundraiser is blowing up like the Russian port of Tuapse, which is unreal. But take a look at this clip. Take a look at this clip. In honor of Brittany Taz, the port of Tuapse was taken out today.
That is insane. The fundraiser is blowing up like Tuapse. It's a wonderful sight.
You know, Matthew, you know what O-Block and Tuapse have in common?
There's a lot of banging going on.
Man, they're always scared of Tuapse.
Now that's clever.
Man, man, give me a Nobel. Give me a Nobel.
You'll get Nobel for that. Nobel. Oh my God, look at that. Anonymous just threw in that 100. Another anonymous 100. We are only about, I think, $200 away from the goal right this second. That's wild. We're only like 20 minutes in, folks. What the hell is going on tonight? Look at this. It's
What
crazy.
in the world? Something's crazy going on tonight. I don't know how to explain it, folks, but it's going insane in here. This is unreal. The fundraiser is exploding. And you know what? It's exploding like the oil storages at Harvitske, which exploded in the middle of Crimea overnight. Take a look at that.
Oh, wow.
The Ukrainians also hit this as well, delivering a deadly blow to it, and of course, leading to that giant explosion that we saw in the distance right there. Quite impressive. Meanwhile, near Simferopol, we also got to hear that another railway was sabotaged, not by Ukrainian drone attacks, this time by the Ukrainian partisan movement attakcs, which sabotaged a railway near Simferopol in Crimea, temporarily halting train traffic and disrupting Russian supply lines to the Kherson and Zaporizhia fronts. The operation targeted a key logistical artery Russian forces used to transport munitions, fuel, and military equipment to frontline units. Attakcs operates as part of a wider network of Ukrainian partisans conducting sabotage and intelligence gathering in occupied territories. The strike demonstrates Russia's vulnerability even in Crimea, territory it has controlled since 2014. Partisans and drone activity targeting the peninsula's role as a military hub has surged. As we hit the goal!
That's crazy, honestly. It's only 27 minutes in, and we're now several $100s above the goal right this second. That is why I think that might be the fastest goal we've hit in a while, actually. That's pretty damn fast tonight.
That's unbelievable. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. I gotta be honest with y'all, folks. I haven't seen nothing like that in quite a while. That is one of the fastest fundraiser goals that we've hit. It's in 27 minutes. We've actually raised $100 a minute here on air, and that is absolutely unreal to think that we've done that tonight. Truly unbelievable. And a massive and incredible shout out to the Lee Spring Army for raising such a fantastic fundraiser goal once again tonight and getting it on up there and over the top. If y'all would like to continue to support, we can of course continue to support. There's nothing stopping anyone from continuing to support this fundraiser. But for now, we have finally hit the goal. Only 27 minutes in, which is truly unreal. So a massive shout out to each and every single one of y'all so much once again for supporting that fundraiser. And of course, in the middle of this heavy attack that has been conducted on the Russian Federation overnight. Still, we have also been able to hear that unfortunately there are some greater circumstances that are going on right now, at least in the United States of America, in terms of support to Ukraine. As we have been able to hear that according to information that has been cited today from the Department of State, deliveries of U.S. weapons to NATO allies for Ukraine has been halted due to the ongoing government shutdown. The suspension affects shipments of weapons such as AIM-120 AMRAAMs, the Aegis combat systems, and HIMARS launchers. So it does appear that at the moment there is a bit of a significant issue, at least with the logistics side of things, because of the ongoing government shutdown that's happening here within the United States of America. And a lot of people are wondering whether or not the Ukrainians will be able to bear the brunt of this delay and wait for the government to eventually reopen. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so right on its face, this looks like very bad news. It had people very worried today about hearing about the U.S. weapon shipments being halted to Europe, which were being sent to Ukraine due to the government shutdown here in the United States. So will this be an issue in your opinion? And 49% said yes, Ukraine cannot afford this delay, while 24% said it'll be a minor issue, not a huge one, and 18% said no, Ukraine can manage just fine. And I'm with the 24%. I think it's going to be only a minor issue because here's the good news, folks. Here's the good news. The weapons that were already being shipped to Europe, a lot of them are sitting in staging areas inside of Europe and Germany, Poland, etc., simply waiting to go across the border and into Ukraine. So there's still a lot of weapons and I guess you could call it a backlog that are waiting to go into Ukraine. So this temporary halt of the shipments isn't going to be that big of a deal. And also, it's due to the U.S. government shutdown. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think the shutdown's about to come to an end. I think it's going to get wrapped up here pretty soon. Hopefully it will. And it won't be an issue anyway because it's going to get wrapped up. So I'm with the 24%. It's annoying. Yes, it is. Very annoying. But at the same time, though, it's not going to be a major issue that affects Ukraine at any point right now. And also, by the way, another thing as well, Ukraine is going into the winter months. They're about to go into the winter, and typically during that time anyway, the frontline fighting starts slowing down just due to the weather aspect of it. So that's another huge aspect. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that, in my opinion, the Ukrainians can afford at least a little delay, and this will most likely only end up being a minor issue. Considering that the Senate did vote for cloture tonight, which means that we'll most likely see that the government shutdown ends hopefully here tomorrow or the next day, or at least sometime here relatively soon, this won't be happening for that long. On top of that, the Ukrainian armed forces are entering the winter months, and we do understand that the armed forces of Ukraine generally see a decrease in fighting over the winter months because of the inclement weather conditions, aka it's snowing and cold as shit, and no one's going out in the cold and the snow to go and shoot at each other. That usually rarely happens. So generally I would say that I would be with the 25%. This is most likely only going to be a minor issue, and an incredibly minor one at that. So I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that, it is time for us to move on into some larger news that we have been able to hear over the course of the day as well. Moving us on into where y'all think we're going next, folks. Do you think we're going to the Middle East, or do you think we're going to the Caribbean? Where do you think
we're going? I think we're going to the Caribbean. I think, because I don't know, like it's a big arena in both of them today, so it could be either one.
That's right, Matthew. We're going to the Caribbean, and we're going to go and cover the story again, folks, of day 45 of the hunt for Captain Crack Sparrow and his gang of marauders, because we are once again going to be returning back into this area. We don't have any updates on U.S. force dispositions that are increasing or decreasing within this area, but one thing we do have news about today, folks, is from inside of Venezuela and their preparations for an eventual war with the United States, which may be coming around the corner. Inside of Caracas, we were able to get incredible footage today, unparalleled footage of the training of Venezuelan armed forces. This is the training that the Venezuelan army is going through at the moment, folks. This is going to be the enemy of the Republic if we go to war with them here in the near future, for whatever reason that we actually have. This is the force that we're going to be fighting. So let's watch them in their training, and let's see how well they'll perform. First, we can see these guys in their zebra-striped camouflage, talking to these guys under an awning. It looks like a wedding venue. We can now see them in training. This guy just flagged the cameraman. Nice foul, by the way.
Oh, look, they have piles of rocks and large tires. That'll help.
We can now see them here back under the wedding awning, continuing to talk to the guys about whatever, and it appears that a lot of these guys have gray hair, which generally isn't the most preferred thing for warfare. You're usually looking for younger and physically fit guys. But we can now see them hopping down in a foxhole very calmly and slowly. And one-handing
I think that's too shallow, by the way. I don't think that's deep enough.
Yeah, I don't think that's deep enough either. We can now see him almost poking the cameraman with a barrel. When you see this guy doing the John Wayne pose with his foul, he's got his arm bent to where he's using it as a rest for his foul. I also want y'all to note that they have absolutely no combat gear like helmets or bulletproof vests. These guys are wearing fatigues like this is truly Vietnam.
Honestly, really. And also, look at this next shot right here. They're about to start practicing picking up coffins. Look, they're practicing with the coffin.
Man, honestly, they pretty much are. Wait a minute, hold up. They're popping it open, and oh my god, it's a PRN.
Whoa. Look at that. They actually have one. I can't believe it. They grab that thing like it was a loot box.
You know, why is it silver, though? Usually PRNs aren't silver.
They got oh my god, look at that. A $2,500 donation just came in.
Holy moly.
What in the hell is going on tonight? Like,
oh my god.
That's the whole goal right there in one donation. Look at that.
Holy smokes, we just hit $5,614 raised because of that $2,500 anonymous donation, along with the $333 donation that came in right before that I'm only guessing is from Hal Rose, because Hal Rose always throws in the 333. That is unbelievable. That is unreal. I gotta say, whoever threw that in, a huge thanks to you. That is unbelievable, and the support will be greatly appreciated over in Ukraine. But getting back to this clip outside the hype of that unreal $2,500 donation, we can also see that this guy is using an AK-74. Now we're back to the fouls. Is that even on his shoulder?
Probably not. Probably going to miss some teeth when they fire it.
Also, no mag in the rifle again, by the way. They don't even trust him with that. Oh, look,
Also, by the way, whoever threw in that 2,500 in, please come forward so we can give you your credit. That is literally the entire donation goal in one single donation. So please let us know who it is so we can give you your credit.
yes, please do. We would love to thank you personally. We can now see them getting ready to do a little bit of training on medical evacuations while they still all sit around with no mags in the fouls. They're now taking the simulated wounded guy and putting him on the stretcher.
And in the Venezuelan military's mind, their entire operations consist of creeping around and crouching in a 1 square foot area.
Also, I like how they gave, like, practically no rear guard to the stretcher bearers. Like, they all went in front of the stretcher bearers trying to get out of there first. And there they go.
I don't get it. The good thing they're practicing the wounded exercises, though, is I'm sure they're going to have a lot of that.
I think they probably will. We also got to see them training to use FPV drones today on a Pac-Man arcade simulator.
El segundo comandante le destruyó.
Well, they had to
Vamos a
make
ver,
it an
vamos a-
arcade game. It's like literally just a computer. It's a computer with a game controller hooked up to it.
I don't know. Also, I like the start button, the enter, the menu, the joystick, and everything else. I also like how it's all in English as well.
Aquí nosotros esperando para avanzar. Acérquense, vamos a ver, vamos a darle aquí fuerza a nuestro auxiliar. Vamos pues. No te dejes.
As you can see here, Mrs. Pac-Man is going in for the kill.
A la izquierda.
What the hell are they even supposed to be
Ahí está,
targeting?
derecho.
That's literally a video. That's not even a simulation. They're just playing a video on the computer screen and pretending like they're doing it.
Honestly, like, I mean, I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, if they're already playing on a Pac-Man pinball gaming machine, so it's like I wouldn't doubt it's just the video.
I think it is. I think this is actually a video. I'm not even kidding. I think that really is. But that's what the U.S. is going to be going up against in Venezuela. So I hope that's alleviating some fears that some people have that the Venezuelans are crack troops and that they're going to be, fighting to the death and all that, and they're going to be well trained and they're going to give the U.S. the run for the money inside the jungle. I really don't think they're getting any training at all, to be entirely honest with y'all. So I think that if the U.S. did decide to go in on land in Venezuela, I think this would be a one and done sort of a deal, and we probably would see that the resistance would collapse pretty quickly against the United States inside of Venezuela. Also due to the fact, I just have to add this in. This is probably the most important thing that I can point out. They are so untrusting of the loyalty of their troops that even in training, they will not issue them magazines for their rifles. Now, if they are that scared of anyone getting ammunition in their gun and starting a government overthrow, that lets us know that the loyalty in the army is incredibly low to Maduro. Wildly low. Because if you notice, endlessly, every single time there is a moment for them to actually have an armed live fire exercise or a drill, they never have live mags or magazines with ammunition inside of them that are issued. They're always using their rifles without mags. That is giving us a clear indicator that the trust that Maduro's government has in the loyalty of the military is non-existent. They don't even trust them with any magazines or live ammo for that matter. So these guys actually being trained on how to fire a gun is highly unlikely, which also increases the odds in our favor. So with that, I hope that does address that well. At least the best I can with what's going on with Venezuela, because I think that's going to be a pretty open and closed sort of a case, at least at the moment. But moving on out of Venezuela and on out of the entirety of the Americas now and back towards the Middle East, we have a lot of news that also came out of the Middle East over the course of the day that we are, of course, going to be covering as much as we can. And y'all love to hear that, and I know y'all do. And we have been able to hear today that the United States of America has conducted an airstrike that has killed 2 Al-Qaeda field commanders within a short time span. Apparently, these guys were killed today inside of Yemen, including several individuals. We don't know who the other individuals are, but at least 2 of them were Al-Qaeda field commanders that were inside of the region. Generally, Yemen is a very decentralized place, and you can generally see factions like this existing in large areas because of the lack of centralized control of any one of the factions. These are all of the existent factions that exist within the current Yemeni civil war. The one in red is the official Yemeni government. The ones in orange and yellow are coalitions that are in support of the central Yemeni government. The ones in green are the Yemeni Houthis, which we all famously know, and the one in blue is actually the Republic of Yemen Yemeni National Resistance, so also aligned to the central Yemeni government as well. However, while all of these factions, except for the one in green, are fighting the one in green holds the majority of the population centers within the country. And because of that, it's incredibly difficult for the others to actually uproot the Houthis and destroy them once and for all, because they really don't have the industrial capabilities or the manpower capabilities necessary to be able to actually try and fight that battle and win it. So for that reason, this area generally exists out of the realm of control. And also on top of that, in the larger arid desert regions, like large swaths of the area under central government control, there is very little central government authority or control within that area. So because of that as well, a decent amount of groups like Al-Qaeda can exist in the periphery of the country and practically never be seen or engaged and destroyed. But the United States did successfully take out a few of them today, which is at least giving us an idea that the United States and its attention is still generally at least on Yemen and the Yemeni Houthis for now. I would have to say that the United States should start focusing more attention on the Yemeni Houthis, considering that they have continued their attacks on commercial shipping once more, and while it's a lot more intermittent now than it was in the past, this is still a significant threat in the outbreak of war, especially if the Houthis decided to start ramping up their attacks during that period of time. Major shipments of arms and equipment, and also shipments that would maintain economic stability within Western countries, could be greatly affected by the lack of shipments or the longer journeys that ships would have to make because of their transit around the Cape of Good Hope instead of passing through the Suez Canal. For that reason, the United States of America should take more actions against the Yemeni Houthis and seek to eventually destroy them, or at least support an international coalition that would back up the official Yemeni government in crushing the Houthis and bringing the country back under central Yemeni governmental control, one or the other. Moving on out of Western Yemen, and on up into the area of the actual Middle East itself, we also have a huge amount of news here. But before we move on into that, I do want to return back to Venezuela for a minute and ask you all, why won't Maduro give his army real ammo to train with? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so just a quick question here to the audience. Why won't Maduro apparently give his army real ammo magazines to train with? Because it does seem like in pretty much all the footage we've seen so far of the Venezuelan military training in these videos, it looks like they never really have real ammo or even the magazine in the gun itself. So that seems a bit odd. So what is the reason for it? And 57% said that he's worried about a possible coup and does not want to arm these soldiers in case they rise up against Maduro, while 29% said he's worried about ammo shortages and doesn't even want them to waste a single bullet, and 7% said it seems like just the preference. He just felt like not giving them magazines today, even though they need to train. So I would say personally, it's probably more about a possible coup attempt would be my guess, because in these countries where it's very authoritarian, like Venezuela, there are factions within the military which can easily form enough support to rise up against the government and then overthrow the dictator. It's very possible, and I think Maduro is very wise to that aspect. He's not wise about much, but he is wise about losing his own power to his own people, and I would say that's probably the reason he's not giving out these magazines to these soldiers. Of course, they're probably also worried about ammo shortages too, because I'm sure they don't have a ton of ammo to work with, but they would probably spare a couple of bullets, for at least for training, but they're not even doing that. So I would say it's probably about the coup issue. So I'm with the 57%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd agree with the 57% as well. They are highly worried about a possible coup. I would assume that loyalty to the Maduro regime is wildly low, and that's also a reason why they're not issuing out ammunition, is because there's probably been multiple stories in the past when the ammunition was more freely issued of soldiers taking the ammunition and possibly conducting some sort of a barracks revolt or something along those lines that had to be put down by the Venezuelan government. So for that reason, now the military has very little trust from the central government, and now they do not even authorize the issuance of ammunition to any of these soldiers, because it may be assumed that they may use it for illegal activities, or they may use it to attempt an overthrow of the government itself. So I would generally have to be with the 57%. This is clearly showing us that the threat of a coup is a high likelihood in Venezuela, and that's the reason why we see that not even magazines are issued commonly to those soldiers. And also, I see some people saying not giving them magazines is really quirky, even without ammo. And that is really wild. That is insanely wild. That shows a complete lapse of loyalty at all. You know what's even interesting about that is that North Korea will issue magazines to their soldiers, but with no ammunition, because they're also scared of a government revolt and an overthrow. So they even give out magazines in North Korea. So how scared is the Venezuelan government of an overthrow if they won't even issue a magazine without ammunition to their soldiers? And they have to be wildly scared, because even North Korea doesn't do that. And North Korea has a paranoia of a possible overthrow of the central government. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because that is probably one of the wildest things that I've seen, at least recently, coming out of Venezuela. But moving on from that, and on out of that news, it is time for us to start moving back into the Middle East, because there has been a lot of developments that have been happening in the Middle East over the course of the past few days, and it seems as though things are getting close to kicking off, if you want to say that, about right now. And we're, of course, going to be making sure to get into all the fun and juicy little details about what's going on around here. Starting in Lebanon, we have been able to hear that apparently, at least according to some sources close to Hezbollah, they have told Ynet that senior members of the Hezbollah group have underwent plastic surgery in Iran and Iraq to disguise their faces as a precaution against potential IDF strikes. I don't really know why.
Plastic surgery, you say? I thought. Now here's a sort of a side note question right here. I thought that was against their beliefs or something. Isn't that against their beliefs to do that?
I don't know, actually.
It would seem like it. Someone that's more knowledgeable about that thing can tell us in the chat. I'm personally not super, versed in it, but I thought that plastic surgery and things like that was not. I don't know the right word. Kosher is obviously not the right word, but that's the only one that comes to mind when I'm thinking if it's proper or not.
Halal.
So it seems like it's not permitted.
I think it's halal.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I don't know the whole thing, so maybe it's called halal. I'm not sure.
I'm not really sure, but one thing I will say, though, folks, is that this adds a whole new level of glamour to what we're doing. We're fighting Hezbollah commanded by the discount Kardashians. This is like a whole new thing. Like this is a whole new deal here.
They might be in for a position in the U.S. government before long to get enough plastic surgery.
Man, honestly, I never thought of it like that. But if they get enough discount coupons from the plastic surgeons, eventually they can cash those in, and you can become something like the director of national security or something, like that's a possibility here, folks. You got to set your sights high. You got to set your sights real high. But still, very interesting to hear that they are apparently undergoing some sort of plastic surgery. We'll have to see if they come out better looking or worse. I have a feeling they're going to end up like those two brothers who went through extreme plastic surgery. Extreme plastic surgery brother. Let me go pull up this picture here. Because
where'd they go? Where'd they go to get the plastic surgery? It doesn't seem like there's going to be a big business for plastic surgery where Hezbollah operates from. So it's like, how do they even go about getting it?
I don't even know, honestly. That's like a great question, really. But man, here we are. Man, this is going to be like the Hezbollah commanders. Man, this is what they're going to look like. This was the before. This is the after.
Is that real?
Yeah, that's real, actually.
Oh damn! I've never seen that before. That's something there.
Man,
Are you sure that's real?
Yeah, this is real. The Hezbollah commanders, man, they're gonna come out looking like this, and they're gonna be like, "Why, no, sir, I've never been affiliated with Hezbollah. Why would you ask?" And it's gonna be like, I don't know, a little bit questionable if you ask me. But anyways, moving on.
Guys could probably fit in well to that cartoon. I think it's called American Dad or something like that. Guy had a chin for it on the right.
Good morning, USA, man. But anyways, moving on from that and into the Islamic Republic of Iran itself, we have also been able to see that there have been ongoing developments within Tehran. Emergency restrictions are now in place. I had to find it there. Emergency restrictions are now in place. Iran has imposed a 48-hour emergency restriction in Tehran after air pollution levels reached the country's highest red alert threshold. So not only are they running out of water, they're running out of air. So they had to put in emergency restrictions in Tehran for 9.4 million people because the air quality got so bad over the course of the day. I've never heard of that ever in my life.
Yeah, it's wild, honestly. It seems like Iran's getting hit with a double whammy here. They've got the bad air, you can't breathe. Also, you really can't hydrate either because the water's running out. What's next? A famine? Like, it seems like something's coming like that next.
Man, Iran's getting hit with like the 7 plagues of Egypt at this point. It's unreal. I've never heard of anything like this, folks. They just announced yesterday they're going to start water rationing. Now today they're announcing the air quality is so bad, everyone's got to stop moving so that way the air quality will hopefully get a little bit better. That's telling you that Iran's having a lot of problems, a great deal of problems, really. But one thing that they are apparently not having too much of a problem with is restarting the nuclear arms industry, as Middle East officials and experts increasingly believe that the Israeli-Iran war in June caused less damage to Tehran's nuclear program than previously thought, deeming another armed confrontation only a matter of time. And we were able to get some additional details out of that over the course of the day, as Iran published a missile hype reel, as multiple analysts and officials are starting to believe that a war between the two countries is going to be an inevitable certainty at this point once again. And we can see the Iranian hype reel for the missiles as they wheeled them back out into the desert. And they're even flying.
You know, this has to warm the hearts of the Iranian civilians when they see those, because they may not be able to drink water and hydrate properly. They may be dehydrated as hell, but damn, that's a pointy rocket.
Man, and look at it go.
I wonder how many of these they have now, because we had heard reports that they had pretty much depleted all their stocks during the last 12-day war exchange with Israel. So I wonder if they've gotten a full replenishment from Russia and their allies.
Yeah, I wonder, honestly. I really do wonder. I wonder. Do they have a lot of these? I would assume they might or might not. It's really hard to say because we really don't know their production figures and numbers to be able to get an idea if they did replenish their stocks. But it does appear that war is going to be on the horizon between the two. We do understand that the Operation Midnight Hammer was not as successful as it was originally believed to be, and that there was some pressure put on from above to make it sound a lot more successful than it really was. We also understand that the Israelis have been raring to go to eventually start dismantling Iran piece by piece whenever they can, and it's only a matter of time before they restart the strikes just for that reason alone. So with those two things together, Matthew, what are people thinking, and what are you thinking as well?
All right, so now that we're hearing the analysts say that the Israel-Iran war will restart, it's just a matter of time. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. And this time, they're saying it's going to be larger attacks, meaning Iran's going to launch even more missiles this time, somehow. And also, Israel's going to ramp up their response to it as well. So, what are your thoughts? And 71% said, I agree, it was never finished in the first place, while 13% said it's a 50-50 chance of it restarting, and 9% said, I disagree, and Iran is down and out between all the water crisis and also now the air crisis they're having as well, and all the other natural disasters too. So I would say personally, we've been saying this for a long time, that situation was never finished. It was debatable after the U.S. sent the B-2 bombers in to strike the nuclear sites, whether or not it was actually effective or not. And now we're hearing new reporting yet again for probably the 10th time in a row, saying that the B-2s apparently did not take out what we thought it took out, and it barely basically dented the Iranian nuclear program. So there's been a lot of misinformation around those strikes, and it sounds like the truth is most likely we did not achieve our aims the way we needed to do it. So we're definitely going back. Israel's also going to probably be ramping up to defend their country because, once again, Iran is going to lash out heavily at Israel like they always do, and it's probably going to be a whole shebang coming up very soon. So I'm with the 71%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'll be with the 71% as well. This largely was never finished. We stated very early on, right after the attacks from the United States, that it didn't appear that the attacks were significant enough to cause enough damage to completely destroy the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And because, let's see, how do I put this? Because the administration couldn't accept that it didn't seem as successful as they wanted it to be off of a one-and-done operation, pressure was put on pretty much everyone in the world, also including us because everyone just started to go with it, that the strikes were wildly successful and everything had been destroyed and everything went perfectly and nothing's ever been done better in the history of the world. And as the months have gone by since then, it's become openly clear that that's not the case at all, and that was a flat-out lie. The Iranian nuclear program largely has remained intact, and while it was damaged, it was not damaged to the point that it was completely knocked out of action. It does appear that the Iranians were correct in saying that their nuclear programs are still moving forward, and that is something that we are still going to have to deal with, whether we want to pretend that the prior strikes were successful entirely or not. The Islamic Republic of Iran poses a major threat to the region in the Middle East and also to the United States of America directly. If I cannot spell this out enough, I will spell it out again for the very small amount of people who just never seem to understand this. Iran has an intercontinental ballistic missile right now. They are also working on a nuclear warhead right now. So if they make a nuclear warhead that can be mounted on that ICBM, you are under the nuclear gun of the Islamic Republic of Iran if you're in America. If you don't want to believe that, that's quite silly, and it will not stop you from getting obliterated in a nuclear hellfire if Iran decided to fire off that nuke and you happen to be in its blast radius. You will die whether you believe they're a threat or not, and that's why they are a threat, whether people want to admit that or believe that or not. And that's why the United States, in particular, has to deal with this issue. I do not believe, I'll put this out there to all of y'all, I do not believe in subcontracting national security risks to the United States to our allies. No offense to the Israelis, but if an Iranian nuclear weapon is going to threaten the lives of the citizens of the United States within the United States of America itself, that is not something that we tell the Israelis to go handle. That's something that the United States government will handle. That would be ridiculous to sit there and go, millions of our people may be at risk of getting nuked by the Iranians, so we're going to go and let the Israelis handle that, and instead of treating it like our problem, which it is. I don't understand that at all. So I would have to say the Israelis are certainly going to be going back at it again with the Iranians, because the Iranians really don't even need that much of a delivery system to be able to hit Israel like they would with us. But I would also say that the United States will probably be returning back to conducting some form of strikes or action against Iran, because there are also millions of lives at stake here in the United States of America if the Islamic Republic of Iran does get a fieldable nuclear weapon and eventually attempts to use that on the United States. Also, I see some people saying the Iranians would never fire a nuclear weapon at the U.S. Do you want to really bet on that? Do you really want to bet on that and bet your life on that, that these crazy radicals, these theological lunatics in Iran wouldn't do something like that? Like, if we have an option, I would rather say I wouldn't bet my life on some crazy radicals in the Islamic Republic of Iran not firing the nuclear weapon. I would more so bet on the idea of going over there and stopping them from even having one, to where we don't have to hope and pray that their benevolence doesn't lead them to fire off the nuclear weapon. These people
Yeah,
are...
obviously, if we have the option, we'd want to prevent them from ever getting it, because we made that mistake with North Korea. Remember that. We let them obtain and develop nuclear weapons, and now they have them. And once a country gets it, there's no going back. The Pandora's box is open at that point, and you can't reverse it. There's no amount of talking or negotiation that's going to reverse that. It was a little bit different, let's say, with Ukraine, because Ukraine did give up their nuclear weapons. They got it in exchange for security guarantees, and also Ukraine was generally friendly to the West. So that's why they did it, because they were pretty much friends with us. Iran will never be friends with us under this current regime they have. So once they get the nukes, it's over with. They'll be able to try to basically bully the entire region, and they'll actually have the firepower to back it up, which is going to be horrific if they do get that. So prevention is the number one goal. I would say, honestly, if we can't prevent it and they actually get nukes, then we might as well just prepare for Iran to start steamrolling the Middle East, because they're probably going to do that.
And that's true. And on top of that, folks, the Iranians are not like the North Koreans as far as rogue states having nuclear weapons. Iran is wildly unstable compared to North Korea. But while North Korea is an absolute human rights black hole where the human rights don't exist, we kind of have to, on the flip side, thank God that it does exist that way, because they keep the people down so hard in North Korea. There is really no chance of a government overthrow in North Korea that would destabilize the government so much that they would fire off a nuke in anger at anyone else outside of North Korea. That's the only silver lining that exists with North Korea having nuclear weapons. Such a thing does not exist in Iran. It's almost every other day that the Iranian government is on a house of cards. They're on a house of cards as a standard of living for the Iranian government inside of Iran. That is a wildly unstable government to have in possession of nuclear weapons. There are a load of things that can come out that would be a bad result of an outcome of them having one. If the government is overthrown, those nuclear weapons may stop being accounted for properly, and a couple of them might disappear. That is a huge risk. Then we can have terrorist organizations somewhere in the world that have an intact operational nuclear warhead, not a dirty bomb, a real nuclear weapon in the possession of a terrorist force, and we wouldn't really know where it would be at that point, and we would have to go through massive lengths to hunt the thing down and hope that we can hunt it down before it makes it somewhere where it can do some damage. Another thing that could happen is that they could use those nuclear weapons on their own people, or they could use those nuclear weapons on their surrounding neighbors, or they could use those nuclear weapons on us. All of those outcomes are incredibly bad outcomes to have, and those are highly likely because of how unstable their government is. So for that reason, we cannot let them have a nuclear weapon. On top of that, it's just international treaty. They're not allowed to have one by international treaty. There is only a handful of countries in the world that are allowed by treaty to possess a nuclear weapon, and that's the United States, the United Kingdom, the Republic of France, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the Republic of India, the People's Republic of China, and the Russian Federation. And that's it. No other, well, actually South Africa technically, but South Africa gave up all of their nuclear weapons back in the 90s. So outside of all of those countries, nobody on the planet is allowed to have a nuclear weapon by international treaty. So the idea of them even getting one is a violation in itself. We don't even have to debate whether it's an imminent threat to us or not. The fact of them having one at all is the problem, even if it's not a threat to us. So we have to go over there and deal with them because we have to uphold international treaty. Because even if you don't think it's convenient right now, it's definitely going to be beneficial to the United States well on into the future, from stopping them from possibly obliterating and killing millions of people in America because some people in America were too lazy to realize the kind of threat that these people pose and to actually give a damn about it. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And also, I see some people talking about Israel has nuclear weapons. We all know that they do, but they never have officially shown that they've had a nuclear weapon. There was a test, just to give you all the story behind Israeli weapons, of mass destruction or Israeli nuclear weapons. We know that they have them, and we assume that they have about 50, because they have the research reactors necessary and the enrichment facilities necessary to be able to create nuclear weapons, but we've never gotten proof that they have one. And we've never gotten proof of a nuclear test either. And if y'all don't know, a nuclear weapons test is the benchmark test, really the benchmark proof that a country is truly nuclear armed. So if you never see a country officially conduct a nuclear weapons test at some point, the first one at least, you never actually can confirm that they are nuclear armed. The only reason why we know that North Korea is nuclear armed is because they conducted a nuclear weapons test in 2006. That's the only reason why we know that they're armed. Or the only reason we know that China, India, Pakistan, Russia, Britain, and France all have nuclear weapons is because they conducted a nuclear weapons test at some point, and that proved that they had a nuclear weapon, and they announced it to the entire world. Israel, on the other hand, has never confirmed that. We think that they conducted a nuclear weapons test at some point in the 70s, in the middle of the Pacific, because there was a heavy amount of seismic activity that occurred in that area that seemed to have been indicative of a nuclear weapons test, but we were never really able to confirm that that was Israel's nuclear weapon and then trace that back to them. Because if we had, they would have been in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty right then and there, and then we would have sanctioned the hell out of them because they weren't allowed to have one. But because they did it sneakily and we never were able to confirm that they did it, still to this day, the official story about Israel is that they have the ability to make one, but we have no proof that they have any.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting one with that. If we were all being a little if we were all being honest with ourselves here, they're in violation of international law. We know that they have them. It's just that we can't find the proof of where they are. And that's the issue. If there is no proof and we can't 100% confirm they actually have one, which we can't, then we're pretty much at an impasse there. So this is also something else to consider as well. Iran could have a usable nuclear weapon right now. It's just that we don't know because they haven't conducted a nuclear weapons test yet for us to be able to confirm that they have a usable nuclear weapon. That's generally what we're kind of waiting for at this point, and that is the benchmark, if y'all don't know, to knowing if someone has a nuclear weapon. They have to conduct a weapons test of that nuclear warhead for us to confirm that they are nuclear armed. If they have not done that, we assume that they're not nuclear armed. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least with how that generally works and how that works historically. But with that, folks, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news that we have from inside of Europa and also from the Ukraine war. And we will be making sure to get into all of the news from up there. But before we do, I have to say that tonight has been an absolutely crazy night, at least for the fundraiser. We have raised $5,929 for
Whoa.
Razom for Ukraine. We are insanely close to having raised $6,000, which is well over twice the fundraiser goal for the night. And Matthew, can we give a shout out to all of the amazing folks who have helped to make this fundraiser possible and get us up to that unbelievable near $6,000 raised for Razom for Ukraine?
Yes, and we are almost about to cross over that $6,000 mark, by the way, which is about a 2 or 3 times greater than the original goal, which is insane to see tonight. I was not expecting something that high. That is truly wild. And also how fast we reached the goal is wild too, almost a record. But jumping into our top donors of the night thus far, we did have that $2,500 donation, which actually came in from Brian Maddox. He did say in the live chat that he was the one that threw that in, and a huge shout out to Brian for the largest one of the night. That was literally the entire goal in one massive donation right there. So a huge shout out to Brian for really pulling it through tonight with the fundraiser and helping us to smash the goal and then some more on top of that. But also a huge shout out to Brittany Taz, who threw in a $1,000 donation right at the very beginning, and a huge shout out to Brittany for that very big generosity as well. And then we had a $333 from Hal Rose, the signature 333, as well as a $250 from Brian Sodor, as well as a $100 from Peace with War, DB, as well as Danny B, that's Chef Danny, and also we had a $50 from Skip Tracer 007, All Eye, Greg Carrier, Zwan Tran, and also another $40 from Danny B. And so far, that is the top donors of the night. So a huge shout out to all the top donors, and also, if we were not able to call your name out, a huge shout out to you as well for helping us to reach this massive figure that we're sitting at right now, just shy of $6,000 raised for Razom for Ukraine. Truly tremendous. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I would have to say a humongous thanks to everyone who supported the fundraiser tonight, both big and small. And we have to give a massive shout out to Brittany Taz and everyone else who has supported the fundraiser wildly, including Brian Maddox, for y'all's unbelievable support tonight. Y'all are sending this fundraiser to heights that we've never seen it at for well over a year at this point. And I gotta say that it's truly a wonderful and amazing thing to know that so many people are continuing to support these fundraisers in massive ways and continuing to help out on the very people that we're covering around the world in the news every single night. These fundraisers have an impact in their own way, helping people to eat for another day, to have shelter for another day, and to be evacuated out of war zones for another day. I've got to say, it's a wonderful and incredible thing to see that so many people have continued to support these fundraisers, because it continues to show that the Lee Spring Army will never truly die and that we'll continue to support Western and American interests around the globe. So with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, folks, it's time for us to start moving on into a couple of questions before we get on into the rest of the news for the night. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so jumping into our first 3 live chat questions. And also, by the way, if you have a question for us tonight, obviously there are no super chats tonight. I think there's still a loophole to do that, but it's supposed to be all live chat questions tonight because it is the Sunday night fundraiser. So if you have a question for us, tag at It's Enforcer Matt in the live chat and put your question behind it, and I will add it to the spreadsheet. And hopefully, if we have enough time tonight, we can get to a good portion of them. So jumping into our first one here, this one goes to Sneaky Sneak, who said, Enforcer Matt and Enforcer Enforcer, do you think the U.S. is going to strike Iran again? And on my part, I would say yes. I would say the odds of them striking Iran again is, I would say, close to 100% actually. It's just a matter of timing at this point. And I would say we're probably looking in the next couple of months of renewed strikes on Iran. It's probably coming very soon because Iran is still moving forward with their nuclear program. We've now seen satellite images showing that, and also Iran's making statements proving once again that they are pursuing it, which is the big no-no. They cannot do that. They say that's probably the worst thing you can do, and Iran is pursuing it yet again in the midst of having a major water crisis, which is a little bit strange, but that shows you where Iran's priorities pretty much lie. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that we are definitely going to be striking them again. That's a guarantee at this point, and it's really only a matter of waiting and giving it a little bit of time, and then we'll be right back down there on top of them like white on rice and giving them a good schwacking, probably. But I have seen some people talking about the non-proliferation treaty and how you're not bound to the non-proliferation treaty, or Israel isn't because they didn't sign to it. This is how the non-proliferation treaty works. It would make no sense, like, just to explain this. It's a non-proliferation treaty saying that only certain countries can have nuclear weapons and other people that are not those countries cannot have nuclear weapons. The only countries that signed that treaty were all the nuclear powers. So they're not signing a treaty that says we are bound by treaty, although we have nuclear weapons, to not have nuclear weapons. That would make no sense. That treaty was all the nuclear powers coming together and saying, we are the only people who are allowed to have nuclear weapons, and for stability's sake, no one else in the world can have nuclear weapons because we are against nuclear proliferation. It's in the name of the treaty. So the Israelis are bound to it. The Iranians are bound to it. Everyone's bound to it. If we ever have a shred of proof, like, and this is how it works. This is how non-proliferation treaties work, whether you like people or not. If the Israelis ever were proven to have a nuclear weapon, they would immediately be in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it would be the duty of the United States of America to implement every single sanction we could under the book on Israel immediately, because they would be in violation of international law and international treaty. That's not applied unfairly to our allies and elsewhere. This is not the normal treaty that you would find in foreign policy where it's rules for thee and not for me. Non-proliferation is something that is incredibly serious to adhere to. So we would have to immediately smack down sanctions on Israel along with everyone else that's a nuclear power, and then enforce that globally like we do on North Korea. So that's how that generally works. And it doesn't matter if they're not a signer to it. What matters is that the nuclear powers are, and the nuclear powers have an invested interest in stopping other nations from also joining the nuclear armed club. That's just the rule of the land these days. But outside of that, though, I would say that the U.S. striking Iran here in the future is going to happen again. It's going to happen at least within the next year, I'm fairly certain, because the United States cannot allow the Islamic Republic of Iran to possess a nuclear weapon. We cannot have that. It's a highly unstable government, and not only that, they're in violation of treaty, which is really the basic run-of-the-mill sort of an answer, more so than anything else. We don't really have to justify it any farther than they're violating international treaty. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And a great question, by the way, and I hope that it answered that quite well. And with that, it is time for us to move on into the next one.
All right. And also, by the way, I see a lot of people talking about the U.S. government shutdown coming to an end, by the way. We're going to cover this as neutrally as possible. We're not getting into who did what or who's doing this, that, or another. But just to report the facts, the U.S. Senate just voted 60-40 to invoke cloture to advance the CR to end the government shutdown in its first procedural vote. So it looks like the shutdown might be coming to an end. And when it comes to geopolitics, which is what we cover, that means the temporary halt of aid going to Europe from the United States, which once again, is military aid for Ukraine. It looks like that will be very, very short-lived, and once again, the weapons will be flowing once more. Now, obviously, there's a whole bunch of domestic stuff involved with that as well, but we don't get into that. We're simply looking at it from the international perspective. So, a good promising sign. It's not over with yet, by the way. There's a couple more steps they have to get to actually make this official and end the shutdown, but it looks like it's coming to an end. So, Enforcer, what say you?
And that sounds like incredibly good news, and hopefully we'll be able to hear that the weapon shipments return right back to normal, lickety split. And so with that, I hope we addressed that well. And with that, folks, it's time for us to move on to the second question of this segment.
And this one goes to Real Floppy Hat, who said, do you think if we captured Venezuela, would we keep the country as our own, as the United States?
Absolutely not. That would take a lot of administrative costs, and also on top of that, it would have to be administered as a U.S. overseas territory, or it would become a U.S. state. Which generally, I don't really think there would be a lot of political appetite domestically in America to turn Venezuela into an overseas territory or a U.S. state. So generally, we would go in, much like we have with most other countries in the modern day. We would change out their government, and then we'd leave. And I would also be honest with y'all, I'm just not really a huge fan of the idea of the U.S. going around and just taking over land nowadays. Back in the day, that was what we did during a very short period of U.S. history, which was called U.S. imperialism, which was around from about the 1880s to about the 1910s. But before that period and after that period, I'm just not really a big fan of taking territory and holding it, because then we're going to have a load of people in Venezuela that won't pay taxes because they'll be in a U.S. overseas territory. So tens of millions of them that don't pay taxes, but the U.S. has to shell out tax money to maintain the place, because that's what we do with overseas territories. So they don't get taxed, but they're eating into tax dollars. Or the other option is turning them into a state, which would also
You
be...
came around.
Huh?
You came around, by the way. You said a long time ago we were imperialists in the United States, and today you're not a big fan of us taking other land elsewhere. We are not an empire. I'm glad to hear you've come around.
Well, no, like the American imperialism thing. That's a real historical period, man. That was like the Teddy Roosevelt stuff with the Spanish-American War and actually taking land, like taking Puerto Rico and Guam and turning the Philippines into a territory. I still say that the U.S. operates a lot like an empire nowadays. We just don't take land. But everything else we do, it's imperial for the larger part, because really any power that gets to this size, it always ends up reverting to almost an imperialist form of operation. But outside of that, we would have to turn Venezuela into a state. That's our only other option if they do not stay a territory. And that's something that I can see absolutely no political appetite for, because... how in the world does Venezuela apply for statehood? Does it enter as a singular state in the United States, or does it get divvied up into several different states? And if it gets divvied up into several different states, then we also have to really talk about the domestic political side of things here. How many senators are going to be Republican, and how many of them are going to be Democrat by default? And if it's anything rather than half and half, they're not going to accept it. So then it remains an overseas territory, and it keeps draining money from taxes, because if you're a citizen in an overseas territory, if I remember correctly, you do not pay taxes, but the government also has the duty of upkeeping your territory by expending tax money on it. So then it becomes a money sink, and then we will also never get it out of statehood, we'll get it into statehood at that point, because there will never be a half and half split between it being half Democrat and half Republican. It's either going to lean more so towards the Republican side or more so towards the Democrat side, and that will never be accepted by the Congress to allow them into statehood. So I hope that does address that the best that we can, at least in my opinion. I do not think that the U.S. would ever have the intention of doing that either, and I just generally think it's a bad idea. I think it would be a lot better to just go down the route of overthrowing the Maduro government, bringing in a pro-American government, whether it's a dictatorship or a democracy, doesn't really matter. They will eventually evolve into a democracy from its exposure to the United States. But bring in a pro-American government, and then start to financially invest in this new country with this new government, and allow them to financially build themselves up out of the gutter, and then eventually, through pretty much secondhand exposure to what the U.S. is, they'll turn themselves into a democracy if they're not one already, and then they'll end up like any other country that we're an ally with, like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and so on, that all slowly turn into full-functioning democracies like they are today. With that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, not the night, of the segment. Sorry, everyone, I just had to slip up there. But who is the lucky last person who got the lucky last question of this segment?
All right, so that viewer is Sean Wilhelm, and he said, what would happen if a country nuked itself? That'd probably be the worst leader in history.
That's actually happened a lot. The U.S. has nuked ourselves about 1,000 times, if you didn't know. And it's all...
I think he meant intentionally. I think he meant like intentionally, though.
Well, he didn't clarify. But if someone accidentally nuked themselves unintentionally, it would just be a disaster and a massive scandal, and it would probably lead to whoever's in power at that time getting thrown out, but that would be about it. So I hope that does address that well. I was actually about to bring you to the Tonopah testing range and show you all the cool little craters that they have in the ground here from all the nuclear tests. If I can find the testing range. Matthew, where is that testing range? Where is it?
Well, you're looking for Groom Lake?
I'm looking for the Tonopah test range or the White Sands test range.
It's connected to it, so I mean it's going to be off to the left. If you find Groom Lake, just look to the left.
Wait a minute. This is White Sands right here. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the one up here. The Tonopah. Let me just type in Tonopah. Test range. Here we go. Here we are. Where's all the craters? Where's all the craters at?
This thing's massive, by the way. It's a huge range, so you're looking at a ton of land out here. It's the Tonopah Range.
But we're looking for the nuclear craters. Where are the nuclear craters? I think they're further south. Well, where are they? Well, oh, here's one of them.
Aha.
Oh,
That's crazy thing. We just exploded that right in Nevada. That's kind of wild.
Let me see if I can just pull up the Tonopah nuclear tests or something along those lines. Let me see if I can show y'all a picture of one of those nuclear detonations. They're fun. They're very fun. Let's see. We'll just type in Nevada nuclear tests. Here we go. Oh, here we are. See, these right here. We did this like 1,000 times out there in the desert before we banned nuclear testing. This is what it looks like today out there with all the craters from the nuclear tests.
What was the kiloton yield of these?
I think it was like around like 8 to 10 or something around there.
Yeah, honestly, obviously it's hard to tell scale in the desert because the desert doesn't give you many reference points except for like distant mountains, but they don't look like very large explosions for what they are. But obviously it's obviously that crater tells a different story.
Let's see. There's no vehicles around it, unfortunately, to get an idea of scale, but they are quite large explosions, to say the least. They're absolutely unbelievably large, like that one right here.
Oh man, when they used to just walk up to it and stuff, I would assume this is well after the explosion, probably not immediately afterwards, I'd imagine.
Oh yeah, like, and also radioactive half-life from nuclear explosions is like 2 weeks. It's no long period of time at all. So they're generally harmless after that. You can walk right up to them. Just don't walk up to them really within the first week of them going off because it will get you. But still, really interesting, the size of these craters. But let's see. Beyond that, though, we have intentionally nuked ourselves multiple times in this area. Endless examples right here. And if we conduct another nuclear test, it's going to be conducted right out here in the desert again. So that'll be interesting, and I wonder how that'll go. I've heard that the state of Nevada has completely shot down the idea of testing nuclear weapons again within the state of Nevada. But the thing about that, though, is that that doesn't really matter because Nevada hardly owns any of its land, and the state of Nevada's jurisdiction is quite limited out here because most of this is owned by the federal government, so they really don't get that much of a say on whether or not the government blows up a nuke in their backyard. That's really more up to the federal government than them.
Also, by the way, just a correction, by the way, it turns out the Nevada test site there is one of the most radioactively contaminated places in the United States, actually, because of the 900 nuclear warhead tests that were underground between 1950 and 1992. So it's actually extremely contaminated. There's a lot of leftover isotopes in the soil and the groundwater, apparently in that area. So it's definitely still radioactive.
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't really wander around out there long. But one of the most radioactive places in America. I mean, we really don't have any radioactive places in America, so I mean that could be like quite a small amount of radioactivity.
Yeah, possibly so. They're saying here, by the way, like some of the elements inside of the actual nuclear warhead itself, which is plutonium and uranium, they actually have very long half-lives. So they stick around for a while. The risk will remain for thousands of years. Obviously, they degrade over time. So the radioactivity goes down, starts declining by the years. But it's got a long half-life. And I'm assuming that's a very long time. They're saying thousands of years. So it's still radioactive. It's still definitely not totally safe.
Let's see. And what was the name of that range again? The Tonopah nuclear test range?
Tonopah test range.
Radioactivity of Tonopah nuclear test site.
Also, I see a lot of people saying they had no idea that they did that many. Yeah, according to what I'm reading here, it was over 900. But a lot of them, though, were underground tests, though. They weren't the above ground tests. They did some, I believe, above ground, but they weren't all above ground. Many of them, in fact, most of them were underground.
Let's see. The site was established by Harry Truman. Oh, Truman, we love Truman. He does great work. He was really big into like just dropping nukes on everything. Like anything that was a problem, hit it with a nuke. But let's see here. I'm trying to see destruction and survivability testing. Oh, look, there's that house that was in that clip.
Yeah, sure is.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's built nicer than a modern house you can buy as a normal person these days.
Man, we used to be a proper country. But oh man,
We used to make our test houses out of brick. Now we make them out of vinyl.
Oh, here's the fallout exposure in reds throughout the whole of the U.S. from those tests.
Yeah, also, I'm sure everybody's heard the story before, but in case someone's new to it, they can get a little bit of nostalgia here with this. Believe it or not, it was actually Kodak. Out of all the companies in the United States, Kodak figured out that we were testing nuclear weapons first because it ruined a lot of their film. The radiation from it actually put little microspecks in their film. Kodak did some research on it, and they found out it was contaminated with something that's only found in nuclear tests. So they learned about it, and I believe the government asked them to keep it quiet, if I have the story properly, and they did after that. They kept it quiet, but they actually found out that they were testing the nukes before anybody else knew.
So interestingly enough, from what I can see, it actually says that you can the surface is largely safe for brief visits. So this is not the most radioactive place on Earth by far, because if you couldn't say the same thing about Fukushima or Chernobyl. So the most radioactive place in America is nowhere close to being the most radioactive place on the planet, but still very interesting stuff about nuclear testing. Back in the day at Las Vegas, let me go pull this up. They would actually have nuclear tests that were visible from Las Vegas. So people would hang out on the top of hotels and drink cocktails, and they would have a nuclear test party like this one right here. This is Las Vegas. And right out there, that little cloud in the picture, that's actually from a nuclear test that happened off in the testing range in the distance.
Honestly, that was back during the good days right there where health and safety was not really like a major number one priority. It was like just do whatever you want within reason and explain it later and say you're sorry later, honestly. Look at that. These guys were literally out here just standing and staring at it. That's wild.
My eyes, man. Like, man, look at this. The guys from the army wandering around in Las Vegas before or after the test. And then here's a postcard of a nuclear test from Las Vegas.
I had heard at some point that the mafia was trying to procure some of those until they were told no.
Man, that didn't happen. Like, man, that
That's a
didn't
lie.
happen, man. That's true. Man, they would have never.
That's an old wives' tale.
But I gotta be honest with you, man. It's just kind of crazy to think that they would have, like, nuclear tests that were within range, visible viewing range of Las Vegas.
That is kind of wild, honestly. You go gambling there. What stays in Vegas happens in Vegas. Don't tell anybody about the test. Oh, look.
Witness the power of the atomic bomb. $3 per person.
No thanks. I'll pass.
I will not pay for that. That is a scam. But anyways, with that,
and some countries got that for free, and they didn't like it.
Man, in Russia, they were like, "Would you like exposure to lethal radiation? It's absolutely free." And a lot of people are like, "No." Well, it already happened and you didn't know. You're going to have to pack your shit and get on the bus and leave today. It's like, what? It's like, wait a minute, what do you mean? And then they just got kicked out of their own places. But anyways, with that, folks, enough rabbit holes. It's time for us to get right back into the news. We have been able to hear in Belgium today that drones have been spotted again over the area of the Liège airport and the Dole nuclear power plant in Belgium. The airport has been shut down and authorities were scrambled to both locations. The United Kingdom has now announced that they will be helping out Belgium in detecting and taking down these drones in the future. So it does appear that the Belgians are now getting support from the Germans and the British. And I'm not going to lie, folks, when I heard that the British were going to be helping out and supporting the Belgians against a foreign invader or a foreign threat, I got flashbacks of the First World War, because that's quite literally the whole reason why Britain got involved in the First World War, is because the Germans invaded Belgium in 1914 in August. But moving on out of that, and all that interesting side note, it's time for us to get on into Ukraine and cover all the frontline news from here. One, we have been able to hear out of Kyiv today that Ukraine wants 27 Patriot systems from American manufacturers. That's not 27 vehicles, that's 27 Patriot batteries. That is quite a lot of air defense. But the Ukrainians are willing to pay, and the U.S. is willing to sell. So we will have to see when they get these here in the future. Hopefully it'll be quite soon. We have also been able to hear that according to Zelensky, Putin is at a dead end, so he can attack Europe even during the war in Ukraine. It appears that Zelensky's saying exactly what I've been saying and what Enforcer Matt's been saying. And according to Zelensky, Putin is in a dead end in terms of real success. For him, it is more of a dead end. That is why these failures may force him to look for other territories. So it does appear that Zelensky is right in the same camp that we're in, as in the Russians could start a war with NATO, even if it seemed stupid and pointless and nonsensical. They could, because it's a last-ditch effort. Moving on out of that, we also get to see the Ukrainians taking down the Shahed drone by helicopter. Take a look at this. Oh!
Oh!
Oi, oi, oi!
Заснял!
They got it.
Helicopter, helicopter.
Shaggyman, Garen, Gama, Paracopter, Paracopter.
Plastic surgery, plastic surgery. Menacing, look at that.
Man, on a mission. Man, that guy was getting excited at the end, man. He sounded like that SpongeBob fish that was like, whoa, freak out, bro. Whoa! Remember, he sounded like that for a second. Well, moving on from that, I thought you were about to say something there, but moving on from that and into the location unknowns, we also get to see that the Russians are introducing sheep into the logistics.
Бля, вот он вообще идти не хочет. Вот он уперся, блядь.
Oh man, that's an awful looking
Это
sheep. That
может
poor thing's been
освоиться,
through it.
конечно. Я
This is a mangy looking sheep.
Man, I ain't mangy.
Man, I ain't mangy.
хуй знает. Давай, давай,
What
иди.
good's a sheep gonna
Тебя
do?
там
Sheeps
ждут,
aren't
но-
used to bird.
I don't know. I actually don't know why they have the sheep, but they are bringing them to the front. We don't know why yet. Maybe they're eating them. I don't really know.
На элеваторе. Все. Ой, иди потихонечку. Давай, давай. Боевая единица. Давай, иди, там вкусно, нахуй. Там вкуснятина на элеваторе. Да он, да, что-то...
так до газика ебашит.
Да
How long
не,
to
его,
go?
блядь, разъебут птицы,
Конечно,
нахуй.
нахуй надо, блядь.
Huh? Man,
Say what?
that sheep not wanting to go, man. I tell you. But moving on from that, we also got some more information on the Flamingo. According to news that's come out, at least according to the Ukrainians, the Flamingo is able to travel a little bit longer distance than the Tomahawk, about twice the distance, and carry twice the warhead weight. So it does appear that the Ukrainians do not necessarily need, while my esophagus almost collapsed there, the Tomahawk cruise missile, as the Flamingo generally has twice the explosives and twice the distance behind it. We have yet to see one fired off, though, so that is one of the larger issues, at least at the moment. In the meantime, we've also been able to see a Ukrainian Mirage 2000 today in a hangar inside of a Ukrainian airbase. It was quite nice to see it, and I was like, wow, that is so cool. And beyond that, it does appear that the armed forces of Ukraine are continuing to field Mirage 2000s in somewhat larger numbers. Meanwhile, we also get to see a Ukrainian owl attacking and taking down a Russian drone. Take a look at this.
Oh wow, look at that, an attack owl.
Man, an attack owl. Ooh, oh, but crazy stuff, really. And we also get to see the Russian casualty report for the past 24 hours as well, which was quite significant. According to Ms. Deasy, here are the records. She stated that 440 drones is the 13th highest daily loss, tied with October 24th of 2025. And getting us on into the numbers, we were able to see that 970 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed, along with 1 APC, 85 supply trucks, 5 main battle tanks, 19 artillery pieces, 440 drones, and 8 cruise missiles. All in all, not that bad of a day. And moving us on out of the location unknowns and on into the front lines, we did not get any combat footage today out of Kupiansk, the Lyman front, or the Seversk direction, but we did get a little bit of footage today out of the area around Konstantinivka, where we were able to see the Ukrainians capturing the moment that 3 Fab 500s hit a multi-story building. Take a look at this. We see the drone flying around. In a second, those 3 bombs are about to hit. Here they come. Here's the first.
Oh.
Here's the second. And then here's the third.
God. Wow. Not with 3. Not with 3 she can't. Look at that shockwave off of it, too. I think this thing's finished.
And those Fab 500s are some strong business. But moving on from that, and on out of that area, we're now going to be moving on down into Pokrovsk, where we've also been able to hear that according to Oleksandr Syrsky, who is the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, he has stated that Ukraine has multiple plans around Pokrovsk, including contingencies for different scenarios. Russia has massed about 50,000 troops in the area, but attack intensity has slightly dropped, and the situation remains under control. So it does generally appear, at least at the moment, that the armed forces of Ukraine generally have the situation at Pokrovsk, at least according to Syrsky, under control. Outside of that, though, a lot of people have been talking about the United Kingdom deploying its military to Belgium to help with the drones. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so now that we're seeing pretty much daily at this point, Belgium is being invaded by foreign drones, mainly over their airports and also over their nuclear sites. The nuclear sites, in my opinion, is much more concerning than the airport. So what is happening now? Because the UK has now deployed its military to help defend Belgium, which is kind of strange because I thought Belgium was going to shoot these things down, but it turns out they actually have invited foreign help from the UK to get assistance, even though they haven't literally taken a single shot at a drone yet. But what are your thoughts? 37% said it won't do any good, while 24% are unsure. 30% said that will stop the Russians, and 9% said that'll actually make the situation worse. So this one's a bit interesting because, like I said, Belgium is copping out. That's the bottom line. I'm not going to sugarcoat that at all. Belgium should have already shot down these drones if they had the opportunity, which at this point, they've had literally almost over a week of opportunities day in and day out, and they haven't shot a single drone down. They haven't even tried to take a shot at a drone, which is incredibly disappointing to see that because it's a NATO country and our airspace is being violated with no opposition. Apparently, bringing in the UK, maybe the UK will have the balls to shoot something down, possibly. But they haven't done that either. Tonight, they were also invaded by more drones, and neither the UK military nor the Belgian military shot anything down. So I guess it's just the coalition of the scared and meek at this point. Everybody's just showing up and staring at these drones and not really doing a thing about it. So maybe they'll, do something, but I'm not very hopeful about that. But Enforcer, what say you?
And this is the coalition of the fearing at this point. I would have to say that I would be with the 38%. It probably won't do any good. I mean, if the Belgians are scared to shoot something down, the British are going to be even doubly scared because they're not going to want to do something within the sovereign territory of Belgium that the Belgian government is not going to want. So the British being there is really just more so for moral support and going, come on, buddy, you can do it. And that's about it, because the British are not going to shoot something down inside of Belgian territory if the Belgians are also not willing to shoot the thing down either. So I hope that addresses that, at least in my opinion. But moving on from that and back into Pokrovsk, we've also been able to hear that the offensive within the Pokrovsk direction is generally starting to slow. According to the Institute for the Study of War, they've reported that Russian forces have temporarily slowed their offensive towards Pokrovsk, though analysts caution the pause is likely brief. Russian units are not consolidating captured positions, instead continuing probing assaults aimed at breaching Ukrainian defenses in the northern part of the city. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have partially restored key logistics routes north of Pokrovsk, successfully resupplying ammunition and stabilizing several defensive sectors. The Institute for the Study of War has noted that in recent days, the tempo of Russian attacks has decreased as enemy forces await reinforcements while reinforcing their own defenses and expanding logistical support south of the city. So it does appear that for the moment, the situation is starting to generally stall as the Russian Federation is taking time to try and reconsolidate their positions, considering that a counterattack could throw them completely off at this point. Moving on further south and towards Velika Novosilka, we also were able to see Russian forces being targeted and hit today by the 148th Artillery Brigade in this clip right here. And we can see them going ahead and targeting them and hitting them quite well.
And they are smashing them right there, smashing them like Thanksgiving turkeys.
Man, who in the world's smashing a Thanksgiving turkey?
Well, like, man, get your mind out of the gutter, man. Jeez, what the hell?
Man, well, that's what you
What
said.
the hell are
That's
you
what you
talking
said.
about?
Man, that's
I
what
mean, I
you
didn't mean like
said.
that, man. I mean, everything's got two meanings to it. You don't go with the good meaning, the PG-13 meaning out here. We're in Utah now. We're in the place where people keep things PG. It's a good change. We come from somewhere where everybody was foul about everything. And literally everything. It was, yo, pause. Hey, yo, what's he saying? Out here, it's not like that. So come on,
Oh,
man. Get your
yeah.
mind out of the gutter, man. Come
Oh,
on.
yeah. You know what? I'm gonna get my mind out of the gutter. You know what, Matthew, you're right. We're in Utah now. Now, all the statements always have double meanings, but we always got to go with the clean one. And look at that; they just blew the back right out of that building.
Oh my God. Oh, damn. Damn. Oh man, I'll tell you.
Man, get your mind out of the gutter. What are you thinking? Everything's got two meanings. Everything's got two
That
meanings.
has no two meanings. There's only one meaning to that. There is no secondary meaning.
Oh, get the hell out of here! Get the hell out of here! But we can see them slamming them hard down there. They are really getting them. I mean, look at them go. Look at that 6-300s. Another one. Wow, they are doing work down there. It's quite impressive, really. But moving on from that and on up into Kryvyi Rih, we also get to see them shooting down some missiles. Take a look at this.
Also, some guy in the chat called Fly the Net. He said, your channel is full of BS. Well, then you got to feel right at home here, then. Welcome.
Oh!
Oh, no Diddy, no Diddy.
Fly the Net was up there on his tiny post, and he was getting pounded. Man, that's
I'll tell you what, he came in here with the left, and he left with nothing. I don't even know where I was going with that one, but I was trying to make an attempt. Give me credit.
Back in 1992, when I was on the Brooklyn Bridge.
You see, back when the Gaudis and the Gambinos, sir, that was like 30 years ago. Still, nonetheless, it felt like it was yesterday. The Gaudis and the Gambinos.
So, something that's interesting, man, about that guy. I didn't know that about this guy. He wears that red beret, right?
Yeah, he was part of a group that was like doing protection of civilians in the subways and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was the Guardian Angels. I did not know that.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, the Guardian Angels.
They go around with the little red stuff on, like the red beret and the little red like jacket and stuff like that, and they go around protecting. They actually do pretty good work though, especially back when the subways were extremely dangerous. They were doing pretty good work.
Well, yeah, what's wild though, man, is like they did more than protecting people on the subways. Like, they used to go into like drug dens and stuff, that the gangs were running, and they literally go in there and just start beating people up, and then take all the drugs and go outside and destroy them, and, like burn them and stuff. I mean, like they were like just straight up like wild vigilantes back in the day. I was like, this is crazy. Like, I think that's like the closest thing that you get to like a living Batman or something like that in New York City. At least from the stories I was hearing about him last night, because I'd never heard of the Guardian Angels until last night, and I was like, wow. I mean, these people were crazy. I mean, they go to any lengths to help out the city and the people. A lot of them actually got killed. I think something like 7 of them got killed throughout the years doing that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think I saw a video if it was real, because these days you can't tell what's real or not. I think I saw a video of that that Curtis fella, apparently out there doing his Guardian Angel work, I think, and somebody was like trying to beat him over the head with a trash can or something like that. They were actually getting like straight up attacked. So yeah, they're actually out there about that.
Yeah, I mean that was some crazy stuff. I actually didn't know that about that guy. He was the founder of it. But anyways, with that, folks, it's time for us to move on up into Kyiv and cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine here on this day of 1,354 of the war. And so, hopefully it loads. It's taking a minute to load here. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. Peach!
Сьогодні є санкції України. Росія продовжує війну. У відповідь на це має бути наш сильний з партнерами тиск, такий, щоб це було відчутно для Росії, щоб були у них втрати, щоб політично це відчувалося. В сьогоднішніх указах по санкціях політичні персони, російські урядовці, які працюють на окупацію, пропагандисти різного штибу, які виправдовують Путіна, які намагаються нормалізувати війну та нормалізувати окупацію. І також ми відправляємо під санкції колаборантів та кожного, хто працює на російську машину війни. Багато було вже намагань Росії брехати світу про те, що відбувається. Багато було намагань зірвати процеси зі Сполученими Штатами Америки, з Європи. На все своя реакція, свої санкції. Готуємо разом з партнерами в Євросоюзі вже 20-й пакет санкцій. Ми очікуємо протягом місяця підготовку змісту цього пакету і пропонуємо додати 20-й пакет санкцій Євросоюзу російських юридичних та фізичних осіб, які ще заробляють на енергоресурсах, і також буде оновлення по викрадачах українських дітей. Проти цього має бути дійсно тиск, глобальний тиск. І, звісно, повинно бути значно більше тиску на всі схеми, які дозволяють працювати російському воєнному виробництву. І це дуже важливо. Кожна російська ракета, кожен російський дрон – це конкретні компоненти із інших країн, конкретних країн, без яких просто не було би російської зброї. Робота щодо цього має бути значно активніше. І це відповідальність, зокрема, Міністерства закордонних справ України. Будуть найближчими тижнями нові наші перемовини заради більшої підтримки енергетики, передусім, конкретних рішень, необхідного фінансування та потрібного нам обладнання. Є країни, які вже нам допомагають. Зокрема, це держави Північної Європи. І ми готуємо домовленості також з країнами Південної Європи. І дуже важливо, з політичної точки зору, саме така географічна, збалансована підтримка українців, підтримка нашої держави в Європі. Цими днями в більшості областей фактично цілодобово працюють ремонтні бригади. Енергетики працюють, комунальні служби, всі задіяні. Триває відновлення. І хоч складна ситуація, все ж тисячі людей задіяні, щоб стабілізувати систему та відновити після пошкоджень. Росіяни збільшили удари. Збільшили свою ударну силу, використовують в ударах більше балістики. Це означає для нас потребу у більшій ППО, більших резервах обладнання і більш чіткій та оперативній роботі в регіонах. Сьогодні я хотів би відзначити працівників ДСНС України. Вони завжди оперативні, і саме так має бути побудована робота всіх рівнів влади, від уряду до областей і наших громад. Урядовці повинні особисто бути в регіонах, максимальна оперативність та допомога людям. За роботу цими тижнями я дякую особисто працівникам ДСНС України на Полтавщині. Це Євгеній Лучко, Олег Коркішко, це Володимир Мартиненко, це Володимир Пиріг, Олександр Коляка. Я дякую вам, дякую усім вашим колегам, також ДСНС України в Харківській області, це Юрій Паттикан, це Володимир Підгорний, це Дмитро Горін, Олексій Чаплигін, Володимир Федота. Дякую. Дякую кожному, хто працює заради нашої держави. Дякую всім, хто допомагає, і кожному, хто б'ється заради нашої держави, як заради самого себе. Дякую всім. Слава Україні!
And Slava. And I'm not gonna lie, that dog had me getting out and looking around my place like, where in the world's this dog outside? But with that,
I tell you what, Zelensky got that dog in him. That was that dog talking.
Man, just in the background. I was like, man. But with that is the end of the speech from the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And then it's going to be moving us on into the second segment of this stream tonight, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. Right on time, folks. Right on time, which is how I like to see it. We get to have a whole hour and or so, roughly, to be able to chit-chat with each and every single one of y'all. And hopefully we'll be able to have an absolute blast of that tonight. We have been able to raise $6,084 for Razom for Ukraine, which is truly amazing and unbelievable. And Matthew, do we have any more top donors to shout out in between that last segment and this one, or do we not?
So we do. We do have one more top donor. It is Robert G. And Robert threw in a $100 donation to the fundraiser tonight for Razom for Ukraine. And a huge shout out to you, Robert, for that generosity. And also, once again, a massive shout out to the extremely large donors tonight. And even the donors that threw in as little as a $1 donation. Those aren't even that little, because they all have to add up to reach the $6,084 figure that we're currently sitting at right now, which is tremendous. Because let's see here, 2,500, 2,500. 500, that's 5,000. It's almost 3 times. Like if my math is correct, which I wouldn't put much stock in that, it's almost 3 times, which is tremendous to see that. And you'll have to forgive my math ineptitude here. It's the spirit that counts. It's the effort that counts here. And these numbers are looking juicy. Some say these are the best numbers we've seen on the channel in a long time. Some say these numbers are the best numbers. Some say the numbers don't get any better than this. But that's just what they're telling me. I don't know that woman. But Enforcer, you tell me. What do you think?
You know, a lot of people, they've been saying that these numbers are some of the greatest. And honestly, you know, people know me, and I got to say I'm great with numbers. I'm the greatest with numbers. A lot of people look around and they say that I must have passed math with flying colors. I was actually the best in my class, actually. The teacher would come up and go, wow, look at this math. This is incredible math, the beautiful math, the most amazing math. No one could ever do math better than this. And I'd have to say I really couldn't. But beyond that, these numbers are bigly. I mean, they're truly amazing and profound. Incredible, honestly. Matthew, have you ever seen numbers like this? You haven't seen numbers like this. You don't even have to answer. I'll answer for you because I'm just truly the greatest in answering. Some people say that I might be the best at answering, the best ever at answering. They say, sir, you're just the best at answering. It's truly unparalleled. But I gotta say that tonight has been truly an amazing night of fundraising. I've never seen anything like this recently, and this is probably the biggest fundraiser that we've had in quite a minute. And so I gotta say a huge thanks to everyone who's supported this fundraiser tonight, because y'all have gotten this thing to unbelievable heights, and together we will continue to make sure that the Lee Spring Army supports American and Western interests around the globe, and that we can continue to keep the flag of the Lee Spring Army flying high to where we can always say, long live the LSA, and the LSA will never truly die. So a huge congrats and thanks to everyone once again tonight for helping out this fundraiser so incredibly. And with that, folks, it's time for us to move on into that question segment and to get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. And so, Matthew, I understand before we get to that, we have one last question that we've asked the audience about Pokrovsk. And what are they thinking about that?
So I asked the people a question. I said, here's a question. Would you like to answer it? And a lot of people, about 1,200, said yes. And reports say Russia's advance in Pokrovsk, which has many people worried and many people clickbaiting, it has slowed down. The Russians have slowed their advance tremendously, and the Ukrainians are saying it's now under control for the most part. So will Ukraine keep it? And it looks like 33% said yes, Ukraine will keep Pokrovsk. 30% said it's too early to tell, and 27% said no, Ukraine will lose it soon, and probably very soon. So to me personally, I will admit Pokrovsk was not looking that good. It was looking like the Russians were definitely encroaching on it, but out of the blue, all of a sudden, it looks like Ukraine has pulled a rabbit out of the hat, and they've slowed the Russian advance down. But the big question is it I guess you could say, a tactical pause by Russia to regroup and also rearm their soldiers before they make a new push into Pokrovsk? Or is it actually because the Ukrainians are putting up enough resistance to actually hold the Russians off? That is a big question mark to me. It's kind of too early to tell, in my opinion. I'm with the 31%. I'm kind of leaning toward the idea, not trying to be a pessimist, but I'm kind of leaning toward the idea that Russia might be taking a pause before they make their last push into Pokrovsk, and this might not be over yet. So I hope it's under control, but I don't think I don't think the threat's over yet. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to be honest with y'all. I'm going to be with a 27%. I think the Ukrainians may lose it soon. If we actually look at the frontline situation, it's not looking that good. And to be entirely honest with y'all, when the Russians do start up their offensive again, which they will, that's not really that big of a question. This is a moment to regroup and rearm. You can see here, Myrnograd is almost completely surrounded. And while the Ukrainians were able to completely stop the northern flank from moving, the southern flank actually started to move a little bit more quickly, at least over the past few weeks, and they were able to make it into the city. And usually once the Russians make it into a city, it is a downhill fight from there, and while the Ukrainians are able to inflict heavy casualties on the Russians and make that advance a very grueling and slow one through the city and make them pay for every block, the Russians do eventually take the city. That's usually what's happened historically. So with that in mind, I would have to say the Ukrainians probably are going to end up losing this. At this moment, if I was the commander in charge of this situation in Ukraine, I would be moving ahead with having a tactical retreat conducted out of Myrnograd, so that way those forces do not get encircled, because they are dangerously close to being encircled right now, and the city of Pokrovsk is mostly under Russian control at this point. So we can guarantee the Russians will reassert an offensive, because at this point, it is such a small amount of ground to cover. It's about 1 kilometer. That'll take them about 2 weeks to cover at the going Russian speed at which they move. They will make sure to start a second offensive at this point in the city, and they're only regrouping. So I would have to be with the 27%. I don't mean to sound like a pessimist, but when a battle's lost, a battle's lost. The analysis is always fair, and the current frontline situation as it exists right here, right now, this isn't a good look. The Ukrainians need to withdraw from Mirnohrad, and they need to recreate or reform a defensive line in between Dobropilya and Hirshiny there to the west, and they'll be able to hold that probably for a couple of months before the Russians actually break through that. So with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. But once again, it's just my opinion and my analysis. If you don't agree with it, that's fine. But we'll see who ends up being right in the end. It might be me, it might be you. We don't know. We don't know. We're not always right here on the channel. So I might be wrong, you never know. But with that, it is time for us to get on into all of those questions. And Matthew, what do we got?
All right. So jumping into our last question segment of the night, we have a lot of good live chats tonight. We have about, I would say, I'm trying to do some quick math here, which is not my strong suit. We have about 18 really good live chats so far. Also, by the way, we do have one super chat to get to. But before we get to all that, we need to grab our Morse code decoders. And tonight we had Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Arabelle Garbo, Her Royal Fluffiness, Kush, Kobe Attakcs, Sire, and Brian Blairstown. And they said the Morse code says Ukraine be putting a whooping on the Russian ports and stuff, man. Like, damn, dude. LLT, LLC.
And that's the sound of money. Y'all get that dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I gotta congratulate y'all greatly for getting that correct again. Y'all are always getting that correct. And I'm really amazed, even with a Morse code message like that, y'all are still getting it dead on the nail. That's truly amazing. And I gotta congratulate y'all for that. So, I hope that does address that incredibly well. A massive shout out to the Lee Spring Army Signal Corps once again. And with that, it's time for us to move on into the questions. What do we got, Matthew? What do we got?
All right, so our first one is our one super chat. And Michael Cobb, he put in a 2. And thank you very much, Michael, for that support. He said, the government just voted to reopen. And he is correct, but partially correct, I will say. The U.S. Senate voted 60-40 to invoke cloture to advance the CR, the bill, to end the government shutdown. So it's a first procedural vote. There's still a couple more steps to go, so it's not open yet, folks. It's not quite open yet, but it looks like the initial steps have been taken, which it seems like from this point, it'll be a domino effect from here forward. It'll probably reopen probably in the next couple of days is my guess. I imagine it probably will. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would assume so as well. I would be with Matthew on that. The government will probably reopen within the next several days, but it's not going to be immediate as in happening tomorrow. So I hope that does address that the best we can, at least from what we would know. And what do we know? What do we know? We don't know squat. But with that, I hope that does address it the best we possibly can, all jokes aside. And with that, it is time for us to move on and into the next one. But a huge thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep rolling.
Yes, indeed. So jumping into our live chat questions, the many good, juicy live chat questions we've had. Also, by the way, please no politics in the chat. I knew when I said that someone was going to do it, and someone just did it. So please no politics, folks. But jumping in to our live chat questions, our first one goes to Darkside. And he said, will Russia go to war with the United States because of their economy collapsing in on itself?
It's possible. It wouldn't be a direct war with the United States. It'd be more so a war with Europe, which would drag the United States in. But it's entirely possible because their options are running thin, and there's really nowhere left for them to go rather than to take drastic actions, including a possible war with NATO. So generally, it's a much higher possibility now than it has been before. But it was either that or we just let this war keep going and it ends up in a totally different way, in a worse way than what we're seeing right now. So I hope that is addressed it the best I can, in my opinion, from what I would know. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And moving on to our next one here. Let's see. I saw an interesting comment just come in the live chat real quick. I'm going to grab it. No Sport here said, Enforcers, I'm confident that the Belgians and others have actually been trying to shoot down these drones over their airspace, but are failing in the same way as with the mysterious drones that we're seeing over New Jersey, etc. That's an interesting thought. The reason why I read it off is because I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm not going to say you're wrong because right now anything's possible because NATO won't officially acknowledge it's a Russian drone flying over their airspace, but all signs point to it's Russia. Some of the Belgian authorities have also said that it has to be Russia because there's pretty much no other option. But we were told that the drones over New Jersey were weapons being tested by the United States and they were being mistaken for UFOs or something. That's what we were told, but once again, that's going off of statements with no evidence. So you're kind of having to take people's word for it, which is a little bit iffy in my opinion. So I would say it most likely is Russian drones. I think the answer seems pretty obvious to me, but I'm not going to say you're wrong though. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to say it's not out of the question that it could be hard to shoot them down, but at the same time, it can't be too hard to shoot them down. Like, it's not like these things are completely impervious. The Ukrainians shoot down hundreds of them a day, and if the Ukrainians are able to shoot down hundreds of them a day, you would think that we would be capable of at least shooting down one over the course of a couple of weeks. So I'm not going to say that you're wrong, like Matthew is saying. I wouldn't say that you're wrong either. I would agree with Matthew on that. But at the same time, it is quite weird that we haven't shot down a single one yet. But I hope that does address that the best that we can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Adam Persnosky. Adam, I'm sorry I'm butchering your last name there. I think I might have made a typo in it, but even without the typo, it's still hard to pronounce. But thank you very much, Adam, for the question. He said earlier you said we can send questions to you, so here's my question. Could you let us know what is happening in Sudan later on in the stream? And we are now later on in the stream, so we can kind of cover that a little bit. The Enforcer is going to probably know the ins and outs of it, but I can tell you all this. There are some horrible, horrible atrocities taking place in Sudan. I've seen the satellite footage appearing to show mass casualties of civilians and very, very graphic things, which we can definitely not show on the stream. Sudan's going through a very tumultuous time right now, and it looks like Russia and other countries are basically spurring this on and sparking it, and they're letting these factions war it out with each other, and there appears to be, in my opinion, some form of a genocide happening inside of Sudan. But Enforcer, what can you tell us?
So, funnily enough, we've actually covered this at least the opening day of the Sudanese Civil War. This is currently what it's kind of looking like. You can also tell that the information is quite sparse off of how poorly formed this map is. The Sudanese Civil War is one that's really hard to follow, but primarily there are two main factions. There's the Rapid Support Forces, and the Sudanese Armed Forces. The Sudanese Armed Forces are aligned with the government, and the Rapid Support Forces are aligned with the rebels generally, and most other factions fall somewhere in between. Generally, from what we know, somewhere south of Khartoum, in this area here, along the line of contact, if we want to call it that, there have been a large amount of massacres that have been going on, generally as a result of the fighting. Unfortunately, I wouldn't really be able to tell you a lot about why this war started, because there is not really a lot involved behind it. It's really more so just a power struggle between a general of the Sudanese army, which is the guy who's in control of the Rapid Support Forces, and then the Central Sudanese government, which is still under control of the Central Sudanese government. That's basically the whole war in a nutshell, why it started and why it's still going on. So there's not really a lot of detail behind that or ideological purpose for these massacres. They're just massacres that are happening because they're happening. That's really the best way to explain it. But that's really the ongoing situation. At least in Sudan, in a very short nutshell. And also on top of that, it's really hard to get into the great depths of detail on it because it's something that doesn't really hit our news cycle every day or really at all. Much like the situation that's ongoing in Nigeria, which is incredibly similar to this just doesn't hit it. And I know that that sounds kind of a little crazy, like how in the world can a major war with mass casualties not be hitting the radar? And I don't mean to sound crass here, folks, but there are a lot of mass casualty events going on around the world, and to be entirely honest, there are a lot of larger fish to fry in the news cycle than what's going on in Nigeria and Sudan. Those are practically, as far as the importance of them on a world stage, they're insignificant, a drop in the bucket. The major events are going on in Europe, in East Asia, and in the Middle East right now. Africa just doesn't really hit the scale because there isn't a lot of major economic activity that happens in Africa, and it usually isn't considered to be a strategic crossroads. So
Also, there's really not widespread access to cell phones or cellular networks inside of that country either. So it's really hard to get any on the ground reporting or any type of footage from the ground. We've mainly had to sort of base what we know, and also the media has been basing what they know off of government statements and also satellite footage from third-party companies. That's pretty much the main way that people are getting information out of Sudan. So there's really not much to even be able to report on out of that country right there, which is unfortunate because there's definitely some big atrocities happening there, but there's proof of it already, and it looks like one of the factions, or maybe multiple of the factions, are simply wiping out civilians that they deem to be disloyal. So it's really horrific.
It is absolutely horrific. It's insane. But still, at the same time, it's just something that hasn't really covered or touched our news cycle a lot. And also, it was wildly unpopular when we covered it, at least on the opening day. Because on the opening day of the civil war breaking out in Sudan, it was so impossible to follow that we didn't know who was who because everyone dressed the same. They just dressed in normal civilian clothes. Even the military did. So it was impossible to know who was fighting who and what was going on. And everyone who was watching that day when we covered it absolutely hated it. So we just completely buried it after that day and then didn't ever cover it again. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from what I would know. But that isn't really a great deal to work off of, to be entirely honest. I'm probably not going to be the most well-versed person on what's going on with the conflict down in Sudan. But I hope that does address it the best we can nonetheless. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to none other than Brian Maddox, who was our largest donor of the night, by the way, during that massive $2,500 donation, which was literally the entire goal amount, actually. So huge shout out to Brian once again for that massive, generous donation. And Brian said in his question, he said, how much reality does Putin really know? And is he in the dark on a lot of reality, or does he just pretend otherwise?
He kind of just pretends. He's not that in the dark as people would think. He actually has a decent understanding of what's going on and how bad the situation really is. And that's why they've started to play the game with the United States at least as long as they could until it completely fell through. And that's also why Putin has been working more towards threatening the West with nuclear weaponry and also possibly preparing for a larger war with NATO, is because they understand that their options are limited and there's only so much farther that this can go before the roof gives in. And they're pretty much left up the creek without a paddle. So he does know the situation. He knows how bad it is. But still, there's really no way for him to back out. Once the war started, there's really no way to end the thing unless if it ends in blistering defeat for him or victory. So considering that right now his only option is blistering defeat if he tried to back out, he just has to pretend like he doesn't know what's going on and pretend to ignore it and then try and press forward and find some creative way to pull a victory out or a rabbit out of the hat is the best way to put it. So I hope that has addressed that the best I can, and I hope that answers the question wildly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, I'm going to return back to something we discussed earlier. No Sport here responded again. He's talking about the drones over European airspace and also the drones that were in New Jersey. He responded again and said, in terms of the New Jersey drones, he feels that the reason given about these objects was total poppycock. And he does not think that the U.S. government or any of the other Western governments have a clue what they are. And it looks like a lot of people actually agree with him on that, which I can understand why people would, because it seems like transparency these days is not a strong suit of NATO or the United States. Transparency seems to be the last thing on their playbook. So it's natural to doubt what they're saying because, they're not being upfront about a lot of stuff at this point. So I just don't know. I'm really a bit on the fence about it. I think some people tend to think that it's probably a UFO or something mysterious because they have a hard time believing that we'd be that cowardly not to shoot down enemy drones over our airspace. But I think it really is what it appears to be. It's cowardice is what it is, at least in my personal opinion. I have an easier time believing that than believing it's a UFO, in my personal opinion.
I'd have to agree with that 100%, to be entirely honest. It looks like straight up cowardice. That's really what's boiling down to at this point. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to Thor Axelson. And he said, you and the Enforcer should talk about the declined operation of nuking the moon. Funny times.
Actually, I don't know a lot about that one. Let me go pull it up really quickly.
You don't remember when we were trying to nuke the moon? You know, that was back during the nuking spree, like when everybody was trying to nuke everything. So they wanted to nuke the moon.
The study of lunar research flights, a top secret plan made by the Air Force, and the plan was to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. Huh.
What a great idea.
Man, back in the day, we were like, let's just nuke it. And then we would try and hit it with a bomb. But that is very interesting, actually. Wildly interesting. I did not know about this one. Did you know?
And it was just for research. Was it just for research? What was the objective behind it?
It was just supposed to be apparently a show of force. And that was it.
Against who?
Against the Soviets.
Well, that's dumb because it's like the Soviets weren't on the moon.
But if we can nuke the moon, we can nuke them.
That's just so goofy, honestly. I don't understand like the logic behind that.
And apparently it was canceled because Air Force officials decided its risks outweighed its benefits.
Oh, look, logic prevailed for once.
And because a moon landing would undoubtedly be a more popular achievement in the eyes of the American and international public alike. So just forget landing. So forget landing on the moon and then putting a nuclear bomb on the moon and blowing it up. Just land on the moon and that would just be more popular anyways. So just go with that.
That was a good call, actually. Pretty bright people we had.
Yeah, that was a wild idea. But did y'all know, this is actually an interesting fact, did y'all know that pretty much all seeds that are used nowadays in the United States in agriculture were radiated, which at least limited doses of radiation actually help them become more resilient to more extreme weather conditions?
Yeah, I did know that, actually.
Yeah, you know, like Monsanto and all of them have those sorts of seeds. Really interesting stuff. But that's why American agriculture is so resilient, even in the midst of droughts and everything else. Our crops just continue to grow, and a lot of people would be like, "Wow, that must be a miracle of the farmers." Not really. It's more so a miracle of engineering, of how we engineered the seeds. So I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So our next question here goes to Margaret Hemsley. And Margaret said, if it's not too late, can we talk about the low morale in the Russian army and how can they win with them killing and basically torturing each other?
That's a great question. Morale has been wildly low in the Russian army as a historical precedent. It's been around forever like that. The reason why is because pretty much all Russian soldiers are there against their will. Most of them are conscripts, even the ones in Ukraine are mostly conscripts, and because of that, they don't really have a lot of willpower to be there or to fight because they didn't want to be there in the first place. So generally this leads to a culture of abuse and everything else that is generally a vice in the Russian army, and that's what they're dealing with especially now in the war in Ukraine because of the incredibly high amounts of casualties and losses that are taken in the midst of just day-to-day fighting. So generally we've seen that a large amount of Russian soldiers get involved in mutinies, they'll kill their commanders, run them over with a tank, they'll run each other over with tanks, they'll shoot each other, and everything else in between, generally just because they're a little unhappy, like they always have been, but the war is making them increasingly more unhappy than normal. That's really the best way to explain it, and it's just an issue that's been existing in the Russian army pretty much since the opening month of the war, really. So I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can in my knowledge of the situation with their morale. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question is going to go to Rare Books. And they said that both Moscow and Kyiv claim the Orthodox Church in their territories supports their side. And how do you see the church influence in the conflict? And would be interested in your thoughts.
The church really doesn't have that much of an influence on the conflict, interestingly enough. The Russian Orthodox Church, and not speaking specifically about religion, because I know, like, you know, when it, like, I just know this, like, and I'm just going to have to say this just to kind of put it into perspective for some folks who are about to do this. Every time we bring up Christianity, we do not need the foaming, raging atheist to come in here and tell people that it's not real, because every time atheism's brought up, there isn't some foaming, raging Christian coming around telling you that you're going to burn in hell. So just give that a break for a minute before we even get into discussing this, because it's always so tiresome to see of someone who disagrees with whatever's brought up just turn into a raging, foaming fool in the chat and go off. So I just want to get that out there before we even get into this, because I know that's coming around the pipe. So Now, with that out of the way, it's time for us to get into the actual discussion about the two. The Russian Orthodox Church is actually not a church. It is practically an extension of the Russian state and the Russian government. That actually happened during the time of the Soviet Union, specifically during the time of Stalin, because Stalin viewed the Russian Orthodox Church, which was the main church of the Russian people, and of course the main church of the faith back then, to be a power of political aspirations generally. And so the church was actually brought by its Soviet constitution under Stalin under direct state control, and the leader of the Soviet Union, the premier or the general secretary, was to be the spiritual head of the Russian Orthodox Church. So still to this day, that system exists inside the Russian Federation. So the church doesn't exist as an actual religious institution, it exists as an extension of the Russian government, and generally a propaganda machine for that reason. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church doesn't have the same connection that the Russian Orthodox Church has to an official government, but generally because the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a Ukrainian Orthodox Church and it's attached to a national identity, it's going to support its own nation and national identity as a result. So it really doesn't have anything to do with actual religious theology. It's just generally which country is running theirs as a state apparatus and which one finds itself just sitting within the other country, and they end up supporting those groups based off of that affiliation. As far as their sway in the war, there's been practically no sway. The only sway that we've known of is that the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine was used early on in the war before they were shut down by the Ukrainian government as basically spy hubs. They would get members of the Russian Orthodox Church to go and take pictures of Ukrainian military equipment and report it back to the Russians, and to generally go around and try and conduct sabotage or misinformation campaigns. That, of course, led to the Ukrainians shutting down the Russian Orthodox Church. And then, I remember when this happened, this was absolutely stupid. The Russians turned that into a propaganda story in America that, look, Christians, the Ukrainians hate Christendom. They're demons. They're shutting down churches. Look at this. And they weren't shutting down churches, they were shutting down extensions of the Russian government in Ukraine. It's not even a church at that point. It's basically a government headquarters for the Russian government inside of Ukraine. And I remember that whole propaganda deal, and I remember a whole bunch of people that I knew back then, including these really goofy people that we don't talk to anymore, and they were like, can you believe the Ukrainians are going to war against Christianity? I'm like, they are not. It's like the Russian Orthodox Church isn't even really a Christian church. It's a government propaganda machine for Russia. But beyond that, that's generally the whole religion side of the war, the best way I can describe it in a short story, really. But a big thanks to you once again for asking a great question. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next live chat question goes to Glock Who's There? And he said, my question is, what would it take for Ukraine to gain air superiority in Pokrovsk?
It would take them pretty much defeating the Russian ground air defense forces and the Russian Air Force, which is not going to happen, unfortunately. They do cause a lot of damage to Russian ground air defense forces and the Russian Air Force, but at the same time, the Russians can also do that in turn to the Ukrainians if they try and focus a lot of their resources into that region as well. So generally, there's no way to win complete air superiority at this point for either side, and the airspace is going to remain contested permanently in Ukraine well on into the future. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a live chat question from Colson. And Colson said, do you think perhaps Belgium is scared and calling out false drone sightings to get other countries to go ahead and come to protect Belgium? And maybe why there's no physical drones being shot down?
It's possible, but at the same time, Belgium cannot cry a wolf too much, because that was found out, and a lot of countries found out they were spending a lot of their taxpayer dollars to move their equipment into Belgium and possibly throw off their own national security for that. That might end up backfiring on them. So I would doubt that to a degree. I think that there's actually drones there, and the Belgians are just scared of actually shooting them down. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a question from TS Actual, who said, I remembered my question, and is there any evidence that Mossad hit water infrastructure in Iran back when things were going on?
No, there is actually no proof of that at all. We saw them hitting a lot of other stuff, but we never saw them hitting and damaging any kind of water infrastructure. So I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to none other than JamFan. And he said, do you think anybody will ever give up nuclear weapons again after what's happened to Ukraine with the Budapest Memorandum?
Generally, no. The only country, honestly, just being completely honest, that was naive enough to do that was South Africa. I don't know why. At one point, they actually had a nuclear arsenal of about 30 or so nuclear weapons, and in the 90s, they voluntarily disarmed themselves completely. Why did they do that? It was just it's very difficult to explain. It's a very long story. Did it make any sense? Really, no. It made no sense at all. I don't think any country is ever going to give up nuclear weapons because there's always an existing threat for them not to give them up. For Britain and France, it's always going to be Russia. For the United States, it's going to be China and Russia, along with North Korea and others. For the Chinese, there's always going to be the threat of the United States and Russia. For Russia, they're going to be scared of Britain, France, the United States, and China. For North Korea, they're just scared of the United States. For India and Pakistan, they just hate each other. And then India also is scared of China. So generally, there's a reason for every nuclear armed power in the world right now to keep their nuclear weapons, because the threat that made them get the nuclear weapons in the first place hasn't gone away. So I don't think anyone else would be giving up their nuclear weapons, but at the same time, Ukraine really didn't have a choice in giving up their nuclear weapons. They were pretty much going to have to give them up whether we forced them to or not, or they were going to end up having worse things happen to them. If y'all don't know this, Ukraine in the 90s was not a peachy place. $45 billion of weapons went missing in Ukraine after the Soviet Union fell and Ukraine was founded as an independent state in 1991. That was only in the first few years of their independence. $45 billion of weapons just disappeared. And a lot of y'all are wondering, well, where did they go? Well, that Victor Bout guy that we traded for Brittany Griner actually was a big part in getting a lot of those weapons out of Ukraine. He ended up shipping them into places like the Middle East and Africa to be used by warlords and terrorist groups to fight whatever fight they wanted to fight. And generally, a lot of Ukraine's nuclear weapons, which is about 1,100 in number, were just too numerous for the Ukrainians to ever maintain. Ukraine didn't even have enough money to pay their army, to even pay their troops in the army at that point a wage. That's why they were so easily bribed, and that's why so many normal weapons ended up disappearing. So the fear around the world is that if weapons are disappearing in that large of a number in Ukraine, these nuclear weapons could also end up disappearing with the right kind of bribes and the right kind of elbow grease. These things could also disappear as well. And that's why we forced Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons, because they would have never been able to maintain them all, and that could have been a disaster because of lack of maintenance. One of them could blow up, or several of them could blow up just sitting around in Ukraine. And then also the other major concern was that they might disappear and end up in the hands of a terrorist force because some arms dealer like Victor Bout happened to bribe someone in Ukraine to get a nuclear warhead, and then they shipped it off elsewhere. So generally, that is the reason why they had to give them up. Ukraine is a very special instance of a country pretty much being forced to give up their nuclear weapons because they had no other choice. Every other country on the planet has a choice, and for that reason, they'll never give them up. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next question goes to Cam Nemesis, and he said, is that Ford-class carrier still dragging its feet across the Atlantic?
From what we know, it's somewhere in the Atlantic. We don't know exactly where at the moment, but it should be popping up in the Caribbean sometime soon, probably within the next several days. So with that, I hope that does address that the best we can. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next question goes to Stealthor, who said, if Iran has nuclear weapons, why would they wait for an attack to test their bombs by striking America and Israel?
I'm not understanding that question, man. Can you reread that?
He said, if Iran has nuclear weapons, why would they wait for an attack to test the bombs by striking America and Israel? I can say on my side, the reason why they would probably wait is because they know that if they go ahead and announce that nuclear weapons are in their country or they're right on the cusp of actually finalizing development, that would be basically the biggest green light that's ever existed in the world for pretty much every Western country to go hard on Iran like they've never done before to make sure that they can't finish the job. So that's probably why they would do that. But we don't really truly know how close Iran is to developing a nuke. We know they're still working on it, and they've been working on it for a long time, but there's been so many different timelines given by Western governments. They've been saying 6 months for like the past, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or something. It's been a long time. So we don't truly know what the real timeline looks like. They could be a week away from it, like they've been saying before, or they could be years away from it. Honestly, we just don't know. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that generally at the moment, they would test their nuclear weapon whenever it's ready, just like North Korea did. So they wouldn't wait for an attack on them to retaliate. And also on top of that, you can't wait for an attack to happen and then fire off your nuke then without ever testing it. Because if you never tested it with a live test, you don't actually know if it's working or not. So the fission may go improperly and it may not go off the right way, or it may not go off at all. So you have to test them to be able to make sure that they're actually working. So we would know that Iran would have a nuclear weapon once that test is completed. They would never forego a test and then take the test as in firing it onto another country, because it could end up failing. And then at that point, if it fails, they just fired an ICBM into the United States of America that was armed with a nuclear warhead. And as far as we are concerned, looking at that on a radar, that thing is nuclear armed and it's coming right for the United States. We are unloading on Iran, and the United States is going to end up killing everyone alive in Iran, including all of the top leadership. So they wouldn't want to chance that and go, you know what, we don't really know if the nuke works or not, but we're going to fire it off anyways and find out, because they could get every one of themselves killed doing that, and it might not even go off, because the way that they built it or constructed it or tried to implement it may have been improper. So I hope that does address it the best I can, at least from what I would know. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to David Tablet. He said, the imminent Israel attack on Iran could be the reason for the recent refueler flights into Diego Garcia. And what are your thoughts?
It's definitely possible. That's what I was kind of thinking as well. But I'm also thinking that that might be preparing for an attack against the Houthis again. I don't know why, but I'm kind of leaning towards we might be considering more actions against the Houthis as well. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And a big thanks to you once again for a great question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Jack Ragnarsson. He said, would the US, UK, and France, or at least the last two, extending their nuclear umbrella to Ukraine, deter Russia from a nuclear strike or creating a nuclear disaster?
It's possible that we could, but we would have to somehow get the Ukrainians to accept a treaty like that, which wouldn't be that hard. But the problem would be is stopping the Russians from creating a nuclear incident right then and there if the Ukrainians attempted to sign a treaty like that. So it's possible that we could do something like that once this war ended, but doing that in the middle of this war going on, that could be somewhat tricky, actually, to be able to pull off. So with that, I hope that has addressed that well, and we are on to the next one.
And we have a question from Peace with War, who said, would the water crisis in Iran push the citizens to be more hostile to the government?
It's possible. I would say it's definitely possible at this point that they're going to end up becoming a lot more hostile, because when people start losing basic necessities like food and water, that's usually when we see that civil unrest will reach its fever pitch. So I hope that does address it the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a question from Armchair Expert, who said, do you think this winter combined with more weapons coming for Ukraine will hurt Russia's advance on the front line?
I think that it generally will. Usually anything that's improving the Ukrainian situation, like more munitions, generally puts the Russians at a pretty significant disadvantage, and usually it results in quite high losses. So I'd have to say yes. I think that definitely will be the case. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one's going to go to AF Kaplan, who said, assuming the U.S. government shutdown is resolved soon, how long will it take for arms shipments to resume? And the simple answer to that question is it'll probably take about a week or two for it to restart. The main problem why it was halted was not necessarily a money issue necessarily. It was more about I guess you could say, a procedural issue with the people not getting paid, I believe. I think that might be more of what the problem was. But once again, that's just based on what I've heard. So, it's all up for debate. But, all the funny business with government shutdowns, it's so weird. Like they'll say, oh, the government shut down, but yet they'll have some people still working. Some people won't be working. It's all very confusing, but it should just be a couple of weeks before it restarts. So not a big deal for Ukraine. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to agree with Enforcer Matt on that. And so with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And I think this is actually our last question of the night. We only have one more left in the spreadsheet.
What? Hello, Jack, what am I supposed to do? But anyway, so that we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And this one goes to LJ Jitus, and he said, I have a real question. I know. And do you think the typhoon will destroy most of China's man-made islands?
Yeah, actually, it will. Yeah, actually, we didn't cover that. There is a large typhoon going on down there right now near the Philippines. It actually probably will, because islands that do not have any sort of a sound structure to them, like made out of stone, these are all made out of sand, they are going to get washed away probably just by the surge alone. So I would say yes, probably most of those islands are going to cease to exist quite soon. So with that, I hope that does address that well. Great question, by the way. That's a great way to end this thing. And with that, it's time for us to round this thing on out for the night. I've got to thank everyone who was here tonight. We have had 81,000 people watch this stream in a very short amount of time tonight, only 2.5 hours. And not only that, we had a peak viewership of 11.4 thousand people. We're always honored and greatly appreciative of each and every single one of y'all being here and enjoying the stream every single night and considering this channel to be your primary source of news. We will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. And also a huge thanks and a shout out to everyone for raising $6,220 for Razom For Ukraine tonight. A truly unbelievable amount of support. And so with that, we will see you all on Tuesday or tomorrow for a short war video if there's enough news to make one. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe. Slava Ukraini, Ram Slava, long live the Lee Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And with that, folks, like the enforcer said himself, a big shout out to everybody tonight for helping us to get up to $6,220 raised, which is well above that $2,500 goal. And that is truly a big, big feat once again tonight. It was almost a record timing too. And also it's a record number as well. So a huge shout out to everybody for that generosity and making that possible yet again tonight for a very, very good cause. And a huge shout out to the all 80,000 plus people that were here by the end of the stream. And we appreciate every single one of you. And we will see you all on Tuesday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, and also maybe midday tomorrow for a short war video as well. But in the meantime, though, Slava Ukraine, Hear 'em Slava, get some rest, and good night.